Hey there, tonight we're stepping inside an 1800s American general store, where the clink of coins and the aroma of fresh spices tell tales that rival the wildest dime novels. What you're about to discover might just make you wish for simpler times. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1800-something, and here you are, standing at the dusty, creaky door of an American general store, the ultimate small-town social network. Forget TikTok. This place has all the latest gossip and a distinct aroma of tobacco and freshly ground coffee. It's the beating heart of any town, where folks gather not just to shop, but to swap stories, news, and the occasional conspiracy theory. And let's be honest, this is the 19th century. Life happens at a snail's pace, and this store is your one-stop shop for everything you might need, from a needle for mending your clothes to a barrel of molasses for your gingerbread. Now, let's talk logistics. How does this store stay stocked in an era without overnight delivery or drones dropping packages on your porch? Picture this: a wagon train filled to the brim with goods from cities like New York or Philadelphia, trekking its way through muddy roads and endless wilderness. It could take weeks, even months, for supplies to arrive. No GPS to guide them, just the sun, stars, and maybe a very tattered map. So when that shipment finally rolls in, it's like Christmas morning, but with more sweat and fewer jingle bells. The store itself is a glorious mess. Forget your romantic notions of neatly organized shelves and carefully curated displays. We're talking about barrels of flour stacked next to crates of nails, and somewhere in between, a chicken might be clucking away, waiting to be sold. The reality is these places were often chaotic, more like an organized jumble, a bit like life itself, right? The general store was a microcosm of the growing nation, diverse, bustling, and a tad chaotic. Back then, cash wasn't always king. Bartering was alive and well, so if you had a sack of potatoes or a few eggs, you could trade them for a length of cloth or a shiny new axe head. The store owner, often the most well-informed person in town, was part shopkeeper, part banker, and part news anchor. They'd weigh your flour, tally your goods, and maybe even slip you a nugget of information about the latest political scandal or local gossip. They might tell you about how the Erie Canal, opening in 1825, was going to change everything, turning New York City into a bustling trade hub and making your little town seem even tinier. And let's not forget the role these stores played in American politics. The general store was a hotbed of debate. Here, you'd find neighbors discussing everything from the merits of Andrew Jackson's presidency to the latest developments in the burgeoning abolitionist movement. It was here, amid barrels of sauerkraut and sacks of coffee, that the seeds of American democracy were sown, one heated argument at a time. But don't get too swept away by the charm of this nostalgic picture. Yes, the general store was a community hub, but it was also a place where the social hierarchies of the day were glaringly evident. Women and children might be relegated to the background, while the menfolk pontificated about the future of the nation. And let's not forget the racial and class divides that were as entrenched in these spaces as in the rest of society. These stores mirrored the complexities of a nation on the brink of modernity, where change was both feared and embraced. So there you have it, a slice of 19th century Americana, where the general store was the stage for everyday life and the backdrop for the nation's growing pains. It's a place of contradictions and community, of commerce and conversation. And as you stand here, taking it all in, you can't help but wonder how these simple, bustling spaces helped shape the America we know today. And so, standing there, you realize that the general store is more than just a place to grab some coffee beans and gunpowder. It's a living, breathing entity, a microcosm of society's ever-evolving dynamics. Let's delve into a typical day in this bustling hub and see how the gears turn. First up, the storekeeper. Now, if you're picturing a jolly old fellow with a permanent smile and a twinkle in his eye, let's pump the brakes on that fantasy. Our storekeeper is more like a human Swiss Army knife, versatile, sharp, and sometimes a bit prickly. This is a person juggling roles with the agility of a circus performer. One minute they're a banker, managing the town's credit lines with a well-thumbed ledger that could rival a Tolstoy novel for length. The next, they're a mediator, settling disputes over everything from the price of tobacco to the best way to fend off a bear attack. In fact, let's talk credit for a second. Forget your plastic cards with fancy holograms and microchips. This is the era of the credit book. Imagine a ledger where your name is scribbled next to a tally of debts, like a permanent sticky note reminding you that you owe the storekeeper for that pound of sugar you borrowed last week. And if you're short on cash, no worries. Just bring in a couple of chickens or a dozen eggs next time. It's like Venmo, but with feathers and shells. Now, why was credit such a big deal? Because cash was about as rare as a unicorn sighting. Coins were a precious commodity, so people relied heavily on credit systems. The storekeeper needed to be a human calculator, constantly balancing who owed what, and to whom. They held the town's finance structure in their calloused hands, which might explain why they didn't have time for small talk. As for the customers, well, they were as varied as the goods on the shelves. Picture a farmer unloading a basket of eggs to pay off a debt, or a housewife, sleeves rolled up, negotiating the price of fabric for her next sewing project. And let's not forget the local children, eyes wide, clutching their pennies for a rare treat of candy or a new toy. But don't be fooled into thinking this was a harmonious utopia where everyone was on equal footing. Social hierarchies were as rigid as the wooden shelves lining the walls. The wealthier folks might waltz in with an air of entitlement, while others, like women or poorer villagers, might find themselves waiting longer for service. And we can't ignore the racial divides, where people of color often faced discrimination, even in these supposedly communal spaces. Yet, despite the inequalities, the store was undeniably a social hub. Picture this. It's a chilly afternoon, and a group of men gather near the potbelly stove, warming their hands and exchanging tales that blur the line between fact and fiction. Politics, crops, local scandals, you name it, they debated it. In many ways, this was a precursor to the modern coffee shop, where ideas were brewed as vigorously as the drinks. So, what about the romanticized image of the friendly neighborhood shopkeeper? Well, it's a mixed bag. Sure, some were kind-hearted souls who extended credit with a nod and a wink, knowing the harsh realities of frontier life. Others, though, might have been less charitable, keeping a tight grip on the town's economy and wielding their power like a sheriff with a ledger. They were pragmatic, sometimes ruthless, always calculating. In essence, the general store was an arena of commerce and community, where the interplay of barter and credit reflected the broader economic landscape. It was a place where the American spirit of rugged individualism met the necessity of cooperation. Every transaction was a dance, a delicate balance of need and negotiation. As you watch the ebb and flow of customers, it's clear that these stores were much more than the sum of their parts. They were the glue holding small towns together, serving as a vital link in the chain of survival and progress. And as you ponder the organized chaos of barrels and shelves, you can't help but appreciate the intricate dance of daily life in this 19th century institution. A dance that would eventually lead to the sprawling supermarkets and online stores of today. So, next time you're scanning your groceries at a self-service kiosk, spare a thought for the storekeepers of yore, who managed all this with nothing but a ledger, a keen eye, and a lot of patience. It's a testament to human ingenuity that they kept the wheels turning, one egg trade at a time. And as you contemplate those industrious storekeepers of yore, let's dive into the treasure trove of goods that filled these bustling general stores. Because, make no mistake, this wasn't just a place to find your standard bread and butter. We're talking about a veritable cornucopia of items, from exotic spices that would make a foodie swoon to the unassuming yet indispensable farming tools that put food on the table. Let's start with those spices. Imagine you're in a world where cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves aren't just quaint additions to your holiday baking, but rather the height of luxury. These spices traveled across oceans, through ports like Boston and Charleston, with a price tag that could make anyone blanch. A single pound of cinnamon in the early 1800s could cost as much as a day's wages for a laborer. These were commodities that people in the know would trade like stocks on Wall Street, not for the faint of heart or light of pocket. But why the heavy price tag? Transportation, my dear Watson. Picture this. goods traveling thousands of miles on creaky ships, followed by arduous journeys on horse-drawn wagons over rutted dirt roads. If you think your last road trip was rough, try adding a few weeks of bone-jarring travel and the constant threat of banditry. It's a miracle anything arrived intact at all. Once those spices hit the shelves, the markup was astronomical, a testament to their perilous journey. Now, let's talk sugar and salt, the rock stars of the pantry. Sugar wasn't just a sweetener, it was an economic dynamo. In the 1800s, sugar was to the culinary world what oil is to ours today. It fueled trade routes and was a driving force behind the triangular trade that linked Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Meanwhile, salt was more than just a seasoning. It was a preservative, a means of survival before the magic of refrigeration. A pound of salt could preserve an entire winter's worth of meat, making it absolutely indispensable. These items were so valuable that they were often used as currency, with salt even being dubbed white gold. Then you had your basic farming tools, plows, hoes, and scythes, essential for the agrarian backbone of America. These were the unsung heroes, the workhorses that enabled settlers to tame the land. Without them, the concept of westward expansion would have been nothing more than a pipe dream. The prices for these tools were steep, often a month's wages, but they were investments in the very future of a family's livelihood. Imagine shelling out $10 for a plow when the average annual income was around $100. Talk about sticker shock. In the world of pricing and distribution, supply and demand danced a delicate waltz. When goods were scarce, prices soared. When they were plentiful, they plummeted. Unless, of course, the storekeeper decided to play monopoly with their wares. And let's face it, some did. They could hold the town's collective wallet in their hands, deciding whether to sell at a reasonable rate or squeeze every penny from desperate customers. It was capitalism in its most raw and unvarnished form. And speaking of unvarnished, let's not gloss over the less savory aspects of this economic ballet. The transportation challenges were immense. With no highways or railroads in the early 1800s, goods crawled along at a snail's pace. A trip from New York to Chicago could take up to 6 weeks, and that's assuming good weather and no breakdowns. Every delay meant higher costs, which trickled down to the consumer. Beyond the logistics, there was the specter of piracy and theft. Goods didn't just face natural barriers, but human ones as well. Pirates stalked the high seas while highwaymen prowled the roads, each eager to relieve a merchant of their cargo. Insurance. Well, that was as fantastical as a unicorn. Risk was the name of the game. Amidst these challenges, general stores were the linchpins of supply chains, bridging the vast distances between producer and consumer. They were the original middlemen, facilitating trade and ensuring that even the remotest towns could enjoy the fruits of global commerce. But this came at a cost, literally and figuratively. The markups were staggering, with some goods costing up to 300% more than their original price by the time they reached the shelf. It was a world where necessity and ingenuity met head-on, each transaction a testament to human tenacity. Yet, for all the grit and grind, there was a certain romance to it all. The allure of exotic spices, the indispensable nature of salt and sugar, the gleam of a new farming tool. They were tokens of a world in flux, where change was both a threat and a promise. The general store was a stage where these dramas played out, each item a character with its own story of adventure and adversity. So next time you're pondering the history of commerce, remember that it wasn't always about clicking add to cart. It was a saga of survival and strategy, a tale woven with threads of risk, reward, and the relentless march of progress. And as you stand in the hallowed aisles of your local supermarket, give a nod to those early pioneers of trade, who blazed trails with little more than grit and a dream. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring human spirit, a reminder that every item on the shelf has a story waiting to be told. So, as you stand there in the metaphorical aisles of history, let's shift our gaze from the goods on the shelves to the bustling life outside the store's creaky doors. These general stores weren't just commercial hubs. They were the beating heart of the community, the very nucleus of social life around which everything else orbited like planets around the sun. And boy, did they have gravitational pull. First off, let's talk migration. The 1800s were a time of great movement in America. People were packing up their lives and heading westward, lured by the promise of free land and the tantalizing idea of starting anew. But here's the kicker. What made these brave souls stop and set up camp in one place instead of just wandering on? You guessed it, the general store. They were like the original Angkor stores in a mall, drawing in settlers who wanted access to goods and a community. Picture this. You're a pioneer family, your wagon wheels as wobbly as your nerves after months on the trail. You stumble upon a budding settlement with a general store. That's it. Decision made. You're staying put. This store represents stability, a lifeline in the wilderness. It offers goods, yes, but also news from back east, a place to exchange letters, and a network of folks who can help you build a barn or lend you a plow. It's a slice of civilization in the untamed frontier, a beacon calling out to weary travelers like a lighthouse to ships lost at sea. Now, you might wonder how a mere store could wield such influence over migration patterns. Well, it's all about the promise of opportunity. Setting up shop near a general store meant you'd have a ready-made market for whatever it was you planned to grow, build, or sell. Think of it as the 19th century version of setting up an Etsy shop, except instead of a digital storefront, you had a physical space to showcase your goods. But it wasn't just about commerce. These stores were social levelers, sort of. While they didn't erase class distinctions by any stretch, they did bring people from different walks of life into the same room. Imagine a farmer, a blacksmith, and a schoolteacher all elbow to elbow, haggling over prices or debating the latest news. In a world where social hierarchies were as rigid as the steel rails soon to crisscross the continent, the general store offered a rare space for interaction across social divides. And let's not forget the political discourse. The general store was essentially the original Twitter feed, a place where news traveled faster than a frontier pony express. Here, locals would gather to discuss everything from local politics to national elections. The storekeeper, often the most informed person around thanks to a steady influx of newspapers and letters, was like the town's unofficial CNN anchor. In many ways, these debates and discussions helped shape the political landscape of the nation, one heated argument at a time. Speaking of politics, let's not romanticize too much. Yes, these stores were democratic spaces in theory, but in practice, they reflected the social and racial hierarchies of the day. Women might find their voices drowned out by the louder, and let's face it, more entitled male patrons. People of color, if allowed to enter at all, faced discrimination that echoed the broader societal inequities of the era. These stores were microcosms of the larger American society, with all its contradictions and complexities. So why, then, do we often romanticize these places? Why do we look back at the general store with a sort of sepia-toned nostalgia, as if they were quaint relics of a simpler time? Perhaps it's because they represent a world where human interaction was at the forefront, where transactions were personal and community was tangible. In our hyper-connected yet strangely isolating digital age, the idea of a place where everyone knows your name holds a certain allure. But let's be clear, this nostalgia often glosses over the harsh realities and inequalities of the time. It's easy to romanticize the past when you don't have to live in it. In the end, the general store was a place of opportunity and oppression, community and exclusion, progress and stagnation. It was a reflection of America in all its messy, complicated glory, a nation on the brink of modernity, grappling with its own identity. As you mull over these thoughts, it's worth pondering how these stores contributed to the shaping of American identity. They were spaces where rugged individualism met communal necessity, where the pioneering spirit was both celebrated and tempered by the reality of interdependence. In this way, the general store was a microcosm of the American story, a tale of ambition, conflict, and ultimately a shared journey toward something greater. So, next time you pop into a store, whether it's a sprawling supermarket or a cozy corner shop, remember the legacy of those early general stores. They were more than just places to buy goods. They were the crucibles where American identity was forged. And as you check out with your basket of modern conveniences, give a nod to those 19th century pioneers who paved the way with grit, determination, and a little help from their local general store. So here we stand on the precipice of history, where the 1800s general store, a metaphorical town square and retail nucleus, evolves into the digital behemoths of today. Let's bridge the gap between then and now. Remember those dusty floors and creaky doors? Well, today they've morphed into the digital ether where a swipe and a click have replaced the clink of coins and the barter of eggs. We've traveled from a world where a sack of potatoes settled debts to one where cryptocurrency and contactless payments rule the day. It's a leap that would make even the most daring 19th century entrepreneurs head spin. But what have we gained in this transition from barter systems to digital transactions, and what's been lost along the way? Let's break it down. On the plus side, convenience has skyrocketed. No longer do we need to haul our goods by horse-drawn wagon or rely on the whims of the weather to get our precious spices from point A to point B. We now have overnight shipping, drones, and a global supply chain that ensures your cinnamon sticks arrive before you've even run out. Thank logistics for Amazon Prime, right? It's a long shot from the 6-week wagon ride that the storekeepers of yore had to endure. However, with this convenience, something crucial has slipped through the cracks of modernity: the human touch. The general store was a place where transactions were personal, where the storekeeper knew your name, your kid's name, and probably your dog's name too. Today, algorithms know your buying habits better than your closest friends. We've traded community for convenience, and while it might be efficient, it's also a little soulless. Remember those debates by the potbelly stove? Now they're conducted through screens, sanitized and devoid of the spontaneous sparks that physical presence ignites. Economically, the stakes have undergone a seismic shift. Back in the general store days, credit was a handshake away, a ledger entry that bound community members in mutual trust. Today, credit is a complex web of scores, interest rates, and online identity theft. We've gone from a personal credit system where you could barter a chicken for a pound of sugar to one where your credit score can dictate your destiny. It's like being in a real-life Monopoly game with none of the fun and all of the stress. Socially, the gap is even starker. The general store was the original social media platform, a place where news spread faster than a frontier wildfire, and where everyone's opinion found a stage. In our digital age, despite the illusion of connectedness, we're often shouting into the void, our voices drowned out by the din of global chatter. The intimacy of those face-to-face discussions, the real-time engagement that fostered community bonds, is a rare commodity today. We've traded physical presence for digital avatars, and while emojis have their charm, can't replace a knowing nod or a shared smile. Yet, here's where the old general store holds a lesson for today's megacorporations: community engagement. Picture this: a world where corporations actually engage with their customers beyond the spreadsheets and social media algorithms, where they build relationships that aren't just transactional but genuine. The general store thrived because it was part and parcel of the community fabric. It was a place of gathering, not just a point of sale. Imagine if modern corporations took a leaf out of that book, minus the need for a hashtag or a viral tweet. It's about making relationships real, not just virtual. This isn't about romanticizing the past or condemning the present. It's about recognizing that while technology and globalization have transformed retail in ways our 19th century ancestors could never have imagined, the core tenets of human interaction remain timeless. People still crave connection, authenticity, and trust. These were as vital then as they are now, and they're elements that no algorithm or app can replicate. So, what's the takeaway as we wrap up our journey through the annals of retail history? It's this: the general store was more than a place of commerce. It was a crucible of community, a forge of social bonds. In our race to embrace the new, let's not forget the old lessons it taught us: the importance of personal connections, the value of trust, and the power of a shared community aren't relics of the past. They are the foundation of any thriving society, digital or otherwise. As we stand here at the crossroads of history and modernity, let's tip our hats to the shopkeepers of the past, those unsung heroes who juggled roles with deftness and grit. They were the original influencers, the ones who could sway opinions and shape communities with nothing but a ledger and a smile. And maybe, just maybe, today's digital emporiums could learn a thing or two from their analog ancestors. After all, in a world of endless scrolling, sometimes what we really need is a good old-fashioned conversation. You're up before the sun in ancient Persia, rubbing your eyes as you step into the bustling streets of Persepolis. You're not alone. Thousands of others are starting their day the same way, drawn to the vibrant morning markets like moths to a flame. These markets are the beating heart of the city, and right now they're alive with a symphony of haggling voices, the sharp scent of fresh produce, and the clatter of iron kettles. First, let's talk spices. You'll find saffron here, that precious red gold, costing more than its weight in silver. It's not just a splash of color or flavor. Saffron is a status symbol, and if you've got it, you're not just cooking, you're showing off. Then there's turmeric, that staple of Persian cooking, adding its earthy warmth to stews that simmer for hours. You're seeing sacks of cumin and coriander, hints of far-off lands where camels and caravans have trudged thousands of miles to bring these treasures to your table. In this world, spices are currency. You could say trading in taste was the original stock market. Onto staples, because let's face it, saffron alone won't fill your belly. Barley is everywhere, the backbone of your diet, transformed into breads and porridges. This isn't artisanal sourdough we're talking about. It's the stuff that keeps the empire running. You'll also find heaps of dates, nature's candy packed with energy. The market is a mosaic of these goods, all vying for your attention, and each with its own story of how it arrived here. Speaking of stories, you might overhear a merchant boasting about their figs coming all the way from the fertile lands of Babylon. But let's not get too swept away by these romantic notions of abundance. The Achaemenid Empire is a land of plenty, sure, but it's also a land of inequality. Here's where the economics of food get interesting and a bit brutal. The sprawling trade networks of the Achaemenid Empire stretch like a spider's web from Egypt to India, with Persepolis at its center. These aren't just highways of goods, they are veins of power and control. Prices here are set not just by supply and demand, but by the whims of rulers and the strategic needs of the empire. In other words, who you know might just be as important as what you know when it comes to filling your pantry. Now, let's get real about those legendary Persian feasts we've all heard about. Lavish banquets with endless courses, rivers of wine, and platters of delicacies that could make a modern-day foodie weep with envy. These meals did happen, but they were the privilege of the elite, a spectacle of power more than a daily reality. For the average Persian, meals were simpler, dictated by the season and your social standing. If you're a farmer, your plate is more likely to be filled with barley bread and a handful of dates than a roasted lamb. Let's not forget the social hierarchies that dictate who eats what. The empire is layered like an onion, and where you sit on that onion determines your diet. Nobility and officials enjoy the lion's share of luxury foods, while the laborers who build the grand palaces and dig the irrigation canals make do with what's left. It's a hard truth wrapped in a delicious lie, abundance for the few, subsistence for the many. And here you are in the thick of it, navigating this complex world of food and trade. Every purchase is a negotiation, a dance of words and gestures. There's no standard price list. It's all about the art of the deal. You might walk away with a bargain or a bruised ego, depending on your skills. As you wander through the market, you're not just buying ingredients. You're participating in a grand tradition that connects you to traders and farmers across the empire. It's a tapestry woven with threads of commerce, culture, and conquest. Each transaction is a tiny act of diplomacy, a moment where the world's diversity comes together in the form of food. The sun is climbing higher now, casting long shadows across the market stalls. Your bags are heavier, your purse lighter, and your mind racing with plans of what to cook. But remember, in ancient Persia, cooking is not just a necessity. It's an expression of identity, a celebration of the empire's reach, and a reflection of its inequalities. As you leave the market, you carry with you not just food, but a slice of history, a taste of the past that tells a story far richer than any feast. As you lug your market haul back home, you can almost hear the sizzle of history coming to life in the ancient Persian kitchen. Let's step inside where the magic, or should I say the labor, happens. First up, meet your trusty sidekick, the clay oven or tanner. This is no ordinary kitchen appliance. It's the engine room of Persian cuisine. These ovens are squat and rounded, resembling oversized pots embedded in the ground, and they are the unsung heroes of baking. It's here that the humble barley bread transforms into something that fuels an empire. And much like today's beloved sourdough, it's all about that crust. But don't get too attached to this rudimentary oven. The true stars of the Persian kitchen are the copper pots and pans. Why copper? Because it's a heat-conducting wizard, allowing for precise temperature control. You might not be whipping up a soufflé, but when you're simmering a stew for hours, precision is everything. Copper was the bling of the kitchen, costly and covetable. While an average farmer's part was probably a battered earthenware affair, elite flaunted their copper cookware like it was a Rolex. Now, let's address the elephant in the kitchen. Who's actually doing the cooking? In the grand households of Persia, it's not the lady of the house slaving over a hearth stove. Instead, it's the skilled cooks who often came from the ranks of slaves and servants. These cooks were the culinary artists of their time, crafting dishes that had to impress not just the palate, but also the social status of their masters. It's a high-pressure gig, and much like today's Michelin star chefs, they were both revered and invisible. But if you were thinking these cooks had creative freedom, think again. The menus were often dictated by the whims of the elite, who were more concerned with ostentation than innovation. You're not just cooking a dish, you're preparing a spectacle. And the kitchen, it's a microcosm of social dynamics. The hierarchy in these kitchens mirrored the rigid class structure outside. The head chef, often a slave with years of experience, would bark orders down the line, ensuring the underlings knew their place, both in the kitchen and in the world. Now, let's stir the pot a bit and talk about those legendary Persian banquets. You know, the ones with endless courses and a waterfall of wine. They did exist, but they were less of a daily ritual and more of a political tool. Imagine them as the ancient equivalent of a corporate gala, designed to impress, intimidate, and negotiate. Here, food was not just sustenance, it was a currency of power and influence. But let's not swallow the myth whole. These feasts were for the privileged few, and even then, they were more about showing off than stuffing your face. But why all the fuss over food at these events? Well, in ancient Persia, food was deeply tied to rituals and ceremonies. It was a bridge between the material and spiritual worlds. Certain dishes and drinks were believed to appease the gods, and offerings were made to ensure prosperity and protection. This spiritual dimension elevated food from mere nourishment to a divine necessity. So, next time you hear tales of opulent Persian feasts, remember the cooks sweating it out in the kitchen, the slaves fetching water and firewood, and the servants scurrying around with platters that weighed as much as their dignity. It's a scene that's part Downton Abbey, part Game of Thrones, minus the dragons but full of intrigue. And while we're at it, let's debunk another myth, the idea that these feasts were an everyday occurrence. For most Persians, daily meals were far more modest. The majority of the population lived on simple stews and breads, their lives revolving around the rhythm of the seasons and the yield of their fields. The reality for many was a life of subsistence, where a full belly was a luxury and a banquet was a dream. As you mull over this rich tapestry of Persian culinary culture, remember that for every sumptuous feast, there were countless kitchens filled with the clatter of pots, the aroma of spices, and the silent hopes of those who toiled in service. It's a story of contrasts and complexity, where every meal tells a tale of conquest, culture, and survival. So, as you plan your next meal, think of it not just as cooking, but as a small act of historical reenactment, connecting you to a past that's as rich as the flavors of ancient Persia. And just like that, we're whisked away from the hustle of the bustling market and into the opulent heart of ancient Persian high society, the royal palace, where the air is thick with the scent of roasted meats and the anticipation of political maneuvering. This isn't just a meal, folks. It's an event, a spectacle, a masterclass in social engineering. At these afternoon feasts, you wouldn't just find yourself sitting next to a fellow noble. You might be seated next to the very person whose alliance could make, or break, your political career. Let's talk seating arrangements, because in ancient Persia, where you sit is about as important as what you eat. In a world without LinkedIn, your seat at the table is your profile page. The closer you are to the host, the more influence you wield. It's the original social network, played out over courses of lamb and pomegranate stew. And if you're lucky enough to snag a spot next to the king, well, congratulations, you've just hit the Persian jackpot. But let's not get too cozy. The art of seating is a delicate dance of power, and one wrong move could see you demoted to the far end of the hall, sharing your lamb with someone who's more interested in your downfall than your friendship. It's a bit like musical chairs, but with much higher stakes and a lot more wine. Speaking of wine, let's pour a little more from the amphora and dive into the significance of these feasts. We're not just here to indulge our taste buds and loosen our belts. These gatherings are where deals are struck and alliances are forged. The dining hall is a battlefield, and the weapons are words, glances, and a well-timed toast. It's politics served on a platter with a side of grape leaves. And those platters, they're loaded with culinary masterpieces that would put a modern Michelin-starred menu to shame. Picture dishes like pheasantgen, a rich stew of chicken or duck, mixed with ground walnuts and pomegranate paste. It's a dish as complex as the alliances being brokered over it. The flavors symbolize the perfect blend of sweet and sour, much like the relationships between the diners. This is food as metaphor, folks. Now, while the nobles are busy maneuvering for power, let's not forget the unsung heroes of this grand affair, the servers and cooks who glide through the room with the grace of a well-rehearsed ballet. Their job isn't just to keep the food and wine flowing, it's to maintain the illusion that everything is effortless. Behind the scenes, it's a frenzy of activity, with orders shouted and dishes prepared with military precision. It's the original Hell's Kitchen, minus Gordon Ramsay, but loaded with just as much pressure. As the feast progresses, the wine flows more freely and the tongues loosen. This is where the real magic happens. In vino veritas, as they say, and in ancient Persia, the truth often comes with a side of roasted lamb. These gatherings are where rivalries are softened, alliances are cemented, and occasionally betrayals are born. A careless whisper over a goblet of Shiraz could change the course of history, or at least the guest list for the next feast. Now, let's take a moment to debunk the myth of the Persian feast as an everyday occurrence. Sure, these events were lavish, but they were reserved for special occasions. For the average Persian, a feast like this was as rare as a day without haggling at the market. Most people were more likely to dine on a simple stew than on the extravagant spreads enjoyed by the elite. The legend of the endless Persian banquet is seductive, but the reality was far more restrained. Let's also talk about the economic engine behind these feasts. The Achaemenid Empire was a powerhouse of trade, and these gatherings were a reflection of its reach. The ingredients, spices from India, fruits from the Levant, and wines from the empire's vineyards, were all symbols of power and prosperity. But they were also reminders of the empire's dependence on its trade networks, a web as intricate as the social dynamics at play in the palace dining room. As the afternoon sun begins to dip, casting a golden hue over the proceedings, the feast draws to a close. But the impact of these gatherings extends far beyond the dining hall. Decisions made here ripple through the empire, affecting everything from military campaigns to trade agreements. It's a heady mix of power, politics, and pomegranates. As we wrap up our time at the palace, let's not forget the role of food in all this. It's more than sustenance. It's a language, a currency, and a tool of diplomacy. In ancient Persia, what you ate and with whom you ate it could mean the difference between success and obscurity. So next time you sit down for a meal, remember that you're participating in a tradition as old as civilization itself. A tradition that's as much about connection as it is about consumption. And with that, we leave the grandeur of the palace behind, our minds swirling with tales of political intrigue and culinary artistry. But don't worry, there's more to come in our journey through ancient Persia. Stay tuned, because the story is just heating up. As we step away from the opulent halls of Persian nobility, let's take a stroll down to where the real story unfolds, the everyday lives of the common folk. Picture the sun setting over the rugged landscape, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. While the elite digest their political meals, the average Persian is facing a very different culinary reality. It's a world where survival is the main course and ingenuity is the secret ingredient. Now, don't let the grandeur of Persepolis fool you. Beyond the marble columns and golden goblets lies a world where barley bread is the breadwinner. For the bulk of the population, dinner isn't a feast, but a humble affair. We're talking stews made from whatever grains and vegetables are in season, maybe a sprinkle of herbs if you're feeling fancy. Meat, that's a rare guest at the table, often reserved for festivals or special occasions. This isn't just a matter of taste, but of necessity. You see, the Achaemenid Empire might be sprawling and mighty, but it's also a patchwork of haves and have-nots. The myth of the golden age of Persia paints a picture of endless prosperity, but the truth is a bit more gritty. Sure, the empire's reach extended from Egypt to India, but that doesn't mean every citizen had a banquet spread before them. The reality is that many Persians faced food scarcity, a harsh reminder that even the most glittering of empires has its shadows. Let's dive into some numbers. At its peak, the Achaemenid Empire spanned over 5 million square kilometers. That's a lot of land to manage, and while it sounds impressive, it also means a logistical nightmare. Keeping everyone fed wasn't just a challenge. It was an ongoing battle against nature and economy. Droughts weren't just inconvenient. They were catastrophic, turning fertile lands into barren dust bowls and sparking unrest faster than you can say climate change. Speaking of unrest, let's talk about how food scarcity played into the power struggles of the time. When the granaries ran low, so did patience. Hungry bellies lead to angry crowds, and the empire was no stranger to uprisings. These weren't just about food, of course, but scarcity was the match that often lit the fuse. It's a tale as old as time. When people are hungry, they demand change. Now, let's debunk the romantic notion of a harmonious Persian society. The empire was a tapestry of cultures, and while this diversity was a strength, it also meant varied diets and culinary practices. The elites had access to the best of all worlds, spices from the east, fine wines from the west, but the average farmer was tethered to the whims of local harvests. It was a culinary caste system, with bread and water at one end and saffron-infused delicacies at the other. But don't count out the ingenuity of the common Persian just yet. When life gives you lemons, or in this case, sparse resources, you make do. Fermentation was one such trick, turning milk into yogurt and preserving it for those lean times. Likewise, drying and salting meat extended its shelf life, ensuring a protein punch even when fresh meat was but a distant dream. These practical solutions were not just about survival, they were about resilience and resourcefulness. As we peel back the layers of this ancient society, one thing becomes clear. Food was more than sustenance. It was a reflection of one's place in the social hierarchy, a tangible measure of status and success. The term breadwinner comes into sharp focus here, as the ability to provide a decent meal was a badge of honor and a ticket to social mobility. And let's not forget the environmental challenges that colored this landscape. Farming in ancient Persia was no small feat. The arid climate and rocky terrain made agriculture a precarious endeavor, dependent on sophisticated irrigation systems that were both a marvel and a necessity. The qanats, underground channels that transported water from the mountains to the fields, were the lifeline of Persian agriculture. Without them, even the most fertile land would wither under the relentless sun. These environmental hurdles weren't just background noise. They were front and center in the empire's ongoing saga. When the systems faltered, so did the stability of the regions they supported. It's a harsh reminder that no civilization, no matter how advanced, is immune to the whims of nature. But what about the myth of the Persian Golden Age, where rivers ran with milk and honey? It's a seductive image, no doubt, but it's more fable than fact. The empire's wealth was indeed vast, but unevenly distributed. While the elite wined and dined on imported delicacies, the average Persian farmer was caught in a cycle of subsistence, working the land not for profit but survival. Yet, amidst these challenges, there's a resilience that's hard to ignore. It's the same grit that built the empire and kept it running for centuries. When you're living on the edge, you learn to adapt, to innovate, to survive. And in doing so, the common people of Persia contributed to a cultural legacy that's as rich as any royal feast. As the day winds down and the stars begin to twinkle over the Persian landscape, it's easy to romanticize the past. But let's not forget the real story, the one of struggle, of survival, of humanity's eternal dance with nature and power. In ancient Persia, every meal was a story, every bite a testament to resilience. So, as we prepare to dive into the next chapter of this saga, let's carry these insights with us. The tale of ancient Persia is far from over, and there's still much to uncover beneath the sands of time. As we move forward, remember that history is not just a series of grand events, but a tapestry of everyday lives, woven together by the threads of commerce, culture, and survival. Stay tuned, because in this ancient world, the story is just getting started. And now, as we push forward in our culinary time machine, let's zoom in on the lasting impact of ancient Persian cuisine on our modern plates. You might be surprised, or not, to find out that some of the ingredients and cooking techniques that grace the courts of Darius the Great are still making their way into your dinner tonight. So, buckle up, because we're diving into a flavorful legacy that's as rich and varied as the spice racks of Persepolis. First, let's talk about some of the rock stars of the ancient Persian pantry that have stood the test of time. Saffron, the crimson wonder that once cost more than its weight in silver, is still the darling of gourmet kitchens worldwide. Ever wonder why your paella or risotto has that golden hue? Thank the Persian love affair with saffron. While today you might be able to find it tucked away in a fancy glass jar at your local grocer, back then it was a status symbol, shaking up the culinary scene like the latest TikTok food trend. And then there's pomegranate. This ruby-studded fruit is almost a metaphor for Persian cuisine itself, sweet, tart, and a little hard to get into. Whether you're tossing its seeds into a salad or reducing its juice into a sticky glaze, pomegranate's allure transcends time and borders. You see, the Persians were onto something when they made it a staple in celebratory dishes like fesenjan. The fruit's journey from royal tables to your local farmer's market is a testament to its enduring appeal and the ancient world's influence on our taste buds. Now, let's address the culinary technique that's crossed millennia: grilling. The Persians had a thing for skewered meats, giving birth to kebabs long before your backyard barbecues. This method of cooking over open flames wasn't just about flavor, it was about practicality. In a world without refrigerators, grilling helped preserve meat, and the spices, cumin, coriander, and saffron, acted as both flavor enhancers and preservatives. So, next time you fire up the grill, know that you're participating in a tradition older than some written languages. Speaking of traditions, let's debunk a myth while we're at it. The grandeur of Persian feasts often overshadows the simplicity of everyday meals. While it's easy to get swept away by tales of endless banquets, most Persians were more familiar with stews than sumptuous spreads. Yet it's this everyday cuisine, hardy, resourceful, and adaptable, that has had the most significant impact on our modern diets. The humble stew, with its roots in Persian kitchens, has morphed into countless variations worldwide, from the French pot-au-feu to the Italian minestrone. But why do these ancient culinary practices and ingredients still resonate today? One word: adaptability. Ancient Persian cuisine was the original fusion food, born out of necessity and reflective of the empire's vast reach. With trade routes stretching from the Mediterranean to India, Persian chefs had access to a dizzying array of spices and ingredients, allowing them to innovate and adapt dishes to suit the palates and resources of their diverse empire. This adaptability is precisely why Persian culinary influences have permeated cultures and cuisines globally, evolving but never disappearing. Let's pivot to the enduring myths of Persian opulence, which continue to color our perceptions of history. The image of Persia as a land of unending wealth and luxury is as captivating as a Netflix period drama, but it's only part of the story. Yes, the elite indulged in lavish feasts, but the majority of the population led lives marked by simplicity and scarcity. However, this juxtaposition between legend and reality is part of what makes history so fascinating. It's a reminder that we're drawn to grand narratives, even when they're more story than substance. In today's globalized world, where food trends spread faster than a viral cat video, the legacy of Persian cuisine is more relevant than ever. Consider the rise of Middle Eastern flavors on the world stage, with Persian-inspired dishes gaining popularity in restaurants from Paris to New York. This isn't just a fad. It's an acknowledgement of the deep, rich history of a cuisine that has been quietly influencing our palates for centuries. But let's not put ancient Persian cuisine on too high a pedestal without acknowledging the economic and political realities that shaped it. The infrastructure of the Achaemenid Empire, its trade networks, agricultural innovations, and even its social hierarchies, played a crucial role in the development of its cuisine. The Khanats that brought water to the arid lands were as much a part of the story as the spices that flavored the food. It's a reminder that behind every great dish is a complex web of factors, from climate to commerce to culture. As we wrap up this historical journey, let's take a moment to appreciate the importance of questioning historical narratives. It's tempting to view the past through rose-tinted glasses, but doing so misses the nuances and complexities that make history so compelling. By peeling back the layers of myth and legend, we can better understand the realities that shape the world we live in today. In conclusion, the legacy of ancient Persian cuisine is not just in the dishes themselves, but in the stories they tell, a narrative of innovation, adaptation, and cultural exchange. It's a testament to the power of food as a connector, a reflection of the human experience that transcends time and geography. So next time you sit down to a meal, remember that you're not just eating. You're participating in a rich tapestry of history, one bite at a time. In the heart of Mesoamerica, there once stood a city so bustling, so alive with the clamor of humanity, it could make New York look like a sleepy suburb. Welcome to Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, where 200,000 souls crammed into an urban masterpiece floating on Lake Texcoco. That's right, the Aztecs had their own Venice, but with more human sacrifices and fewer gondolas. These folks weren't just playing Sim City. They built a metropolis that was both a political powerhouse and an architectural wonder. Tenochtitlan was the brainchild of the Mexica people, founders of the Aztec Empire. Picture an island city with a series of causeways connecting it to the mainland, like a giant spider in the web of Lake Texcoco. This was no ordinary lake. It was a marshy, salty expanse begging for a makeover. The Aztecs, never ones to shy away from a challenge, engineered a marvel of hydraulic wizardry. They constructed chinampers, which are basically floating gardens, by weaving reeds into rafts and piling on mud until they were stable enough to grow crops. These floating farms weren't just for show. They were the agricultural backbone that fed the city's enormous population. The city itself was laid out in a grid pattern, a testament to Aztec urban planning that would make any city planner swoon. At its center stood the Templo Mayor, a towering pyramid complex dedicated to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. Think of it as the Aztec version of a skyscraper, but with more bloodstains. This wasn't just a temple, it was the spiritual and political heart of the empire. And get this, the whole city was organized around it, with roads radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. If you squinted hard enough, it might even remind you of Washington, D.C., minus the cherry blossoms and plus a lot more obsidian. But let's not get too swept away by the romantic notion of a floating island paradise. The reality was a bit more gritty and less Instagrammable. Despite its beauty, Tenochtitlan was a city constantly at odds with its environment. Lake Texcoco was prone to flooding, and the water was too salty for drinking. So, what did the Aztecs do? They built dikes to control the water levels and aqueducts to bring fresh water from the nearby springs of Chapultepec. If you're thinking, wow, they really had their act together, you're not wrong. This was urban planning on steroids, folks. Now, let's talk about the people who called this city home. At the peak of its glory in the early 16th century, Tenochtitlan was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and ambitions. The social hierarchy was as complex as the city's engineering feats. At the top were the Tlatoni, or rulers, who held divine status and were tasked with keeping the gods happy, a job that often involved rituals not for the faint-hearted. Below them were the Pipiltin, the noble class, who enjoyed privileges like owning land and not having to pay taxes. Must be nice, right? The city's bustling markets, like the famous Tlatelolco market, were the true heart of its economy. It was a place where you could find everything from exotic feathers and precious stones to the more mundane but essential cacao beans, which doubled as currency. Picture a bustling bazaar where thousands of people haggled over goods, and you've got a glimpse of daily life in Tenochtitlan. And if you think haggling over prices is a modern annoyance, try doing it with stakes this high, where a bad deal might end up with you on the wrong side of a sacrificial altar. Despite its grandeur, Tenochtitlan wasn't just about temples and trade. It was also a city of contrasts, where wealth and poverty rubbed shoulders on those crowded streets. The commoners, or Maisualtin, made up the bulk of the population. They were the artisans, farmers, and laborers who kept the city running. Their lives were far less glamorous than those of the nobility, but they were essential cogs in the Aztec machine. They paid their dues, literally, with tributes that kept the empire's coffers full. And let's not forget the Tlacotin, or slaves, who, despite their difficult circumstances, had a peculiar twist of fate in Aztec society. Slavery was not always a life sentence. Many slaves could earn their freedom, often by working off debts. It's a stark reminder that while the Aztecs were ahead of their time in many ways, their society had its share of harsh realities. Tenochtitlan's story is one of ingenuity, resilience, and a bit of audacity. It's a tale of people who looked at a swamp and saw a city, who turned a watery wasteland into the jewel of Mesoamerica. So, next time you find yourself stuck in traffic or dealing with a leaky faucet, Just remember, there was a time when city planning involved building a metropolis on a lake. Now that's what I call thinking outside the box, or, in this case, the marsh. And so, while the commoners and slaves kept Tenochtitlan's gears greased, perched high above the societal totem pole were the nobles, sipping metaphorical piña coladas and orchestrating the empire's grand symphony. At the pinnacle of this hierarchical pyramid stood the Tlatoni, the Aztec king, a figure who wielded power with the kind of flair that would make even Louis Roman XIV look like a shrinking violet. But don't let the title fool you. Being a Tlatoni wasn't all sunshine and sacrifices. The role came with its own unique set of gold-plated shackles. The Tlatoni wasn't just some dude with a crown and a penchant for flashy feathers. No siree, he was a living deity, an earthly representative of the gods, and that came with a to-do list longer than a CVS receipt. His primary job, keep the gods happy. A task that involved rituals, ceremonies, and the occasional human sacrifice, all of which were crucial to maintaining cosmic order, a sort of divine project management, if you will. The king was expected to lead military campaigns, expand the empire's reach, and ensure the city's prosperity. Failure was not an option. The stakes were high, and the price of failure often involved a one-way ticket to the afterlife. But the Tlatoni wasn't flying solo. He had an entourage of elite warriors and priests who helped him keep the wheels of this grand Aztec juggernaut turning. Let's start with the warriors, the jaguar knights and eagle warriors, who weren't just there for the aesthetic appeal of their animal-themed get-ups. These guys were the empire's muscle, the SEAL Team 6 of Mesoamerica. They fought on the front lines, capturing enemies for sacrifices, because what's an Aztec victory without a little bloodshed to seal the deal? These warriors were rock stars in their own right, enjoying privileges like land ownership, tax exemptions, and a sweet spot in the afterlife. But let's not sugarcoat it. The path to their elite status was paved with more battles than a Game of Thrones season finale. Now, don't think the priests were just chanting and shaking rattles behind the scenes. These spiritual leaders were the empire's moral compass and intellectual elite. They had the ear of the Tlatoni, advising him on everything from military strategy to agricultural schedules. Because, you wouldn't want to plant corn when the gods were in a bad mood. They were also the keepers of knowledge, preserving the history and traditions of the Aztecs through intricate codices. Think of them as the original Wikipedians, but with a lot more obsidian ink and fewer cat memes. But what kept this precarious pyramid of power from toppling over? Besides the obvious answer, fear, and the occasional coup attempt, it was the nobles' knack for playing the long game. They understood that their fancy headdresses and feathered capes were only as good as the empire's stability. So they engaged in a delicate dance of alliances, marriages, and political maneuvering. Imagine a soap opera set in the 15th century, complete with power plays, betrayals, and the occasional poison chalice. It was all part of the nobles' strategy to keep themselves perched at the top of the social ladder. And let's not forget the economic backbone that supported this opulent lifestyle. The tribute system was the nobles' secret sauce. Conquered territories were required to pay tribute in goods like textiles, cacao, and maize. This not only filled the empire's coffers, but also reinforced the nobles' status as the ultimate consumers in a pre-Amazon world. If you controlled the flow of goods, you controlled the flow of power. But in the end, the Aztec nobility's grip on power was a double-edged sword. Their reliance on warfare and tribute created a cycle of expansion that couldn't sustain itself indefinitely. As the empire grew, so did the demands on its resources and people. The very system that elevated the Tlatoni and his noble pals also sowed the seeds of instability, like building a sandcastle too close to the tide. So, while Tenochtitlan sparkled with the splendor of its nobility, beneath the surface, the sands of time were shifting. And as history would have it, the cracks in the empire's foundation would soon widen, setting the stage for a dramatic reckoning with an unlikely band of European explorers. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's leave our Aztec nobles basking in their moment of glory, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. So, as the Aztec nobility basked in their moment of glory, let's descend from the ivory tower of feathered headdresses and golden goblets to meet the unsung heroes of Tenochtitlan, the Mace Hualtin. These were the folks who weren't just holding up the empire's economy. They were practically keeping the whole thing from toppling over like a game of Jenga played by an overzealous toddler. Think of them as the everyman, except their everyday involved a lot more mud, sweat, and, well, taxes. Now, let's talk Chinempers, those floating gardens that were as much a symbol of Aztec ingenuity as they were a literal plot of land. Forget your garden variety allotments. These were the high-rise apartments of the agricultural world, constructed by weaving reeds into a raft and heaping on mud until it was stable enough to grow crops. Chinempers were the Maisualtins' bread and butter, or more accurately, their maize and beans. They cultivated everything from avocados to tomatoes, providing the calorific fuel needed to keep Tenochtitlan's bustling heart beating. Imagine a salad bar on steroids, and you're halfway there. Life for the Maisualtin wasn't all doom and gloom, though. Sure, they were elbow-deep in soil most days, but their work laid the foundation for Tenochtitlan's thriving markets, like the one in Tenochtitlan. Picture it, a market so vibrant it could give today's stock exchanges a run for their money. Here, you could haggle over everything from cacao beans, which were the currency du jour, to live turkeys strutting about like they owned the place. And if you think a Black Friday sale is chaotic, imagine thousands of people jostling for goods amidst the aroma of spices and the occasional squawk of poultry. Shopping was not for the faint-hearted, but let's address the thorny issue of taxes. The Maisualtin were no strangers to the taxman's relentless grasp. They paid tribute not only in goods, but also in labor, which meant that at any given time they could be conscripted into public works or military service. Think of it as a workforce lottery, but with a lot more marching and mud bricks. Yet, despite the burden of taxes, the Maisualtin were integral to the empire's machinery. Their seemingly humble lives belied a complex social fabric. They were artisans, potters, and weavers, contributing to the cultural tapestry of the Aztec world in ways that went beyond mere subsistence. And here's a curveball. The Maisualtin were also warriors. When the Tenochtitlan called, these commoners donned their armor and took up arms, serving as foot soldiers in the Aztec military machine. It was a bit like being drafted into the ancient version of the reserves, except your pay was more thanks for your service, and less, here's a pension plan. But don't dismiss them as mere cannon fodder. The Maisualtin's role in warfare was crucial. They were the backbone of any Aztec campaign, proving that even the most ordinary lives could be swept up in the grand narrative of empire building. Now, let's debunk a myth, the rosy picture of a harmonious society where everyone knew their place and stayed in line. In reality, the Maisualtin were not always content to remain the cogs in the imperial machine. Social mobility was possible, albeit rare. Through acts of valor or exceptional skill, a commoner could rise to become a Pippleton, joining the ranks of the nobility. These tales of upward mobility, though romanticized, served as a beacon for those toiling away in the fields and workshops, a tantalizing glimpse of what might be if they played their cards right. Yet, let's not kid ourselves. For most Maisualtin, life was an unending cycle of labor, tribute, and service. Theirs was a world where survival often came at the expense of personal ambition, where the grindstone of daily life could wear down even the most resilient spirits. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the Maisualtin were the glue that held the Aztec world together. While the Tenochtitlan and his inner circle plotted the empire's grand strategy, it was the sweat of the commoners that turned those plans into reality. So, as we wander through the bustling streets and fields of Tenochtitlan, let's tip our hats to the Maisualtin. Their lives were far from glamorous, yet they were the lifeblood of an empire that dared to build a city on a lake, an empire that stood as a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. As the sun sets over Lake Texcoco, casting its golden hue over the Chinempers, we'll leave our commoners to their toil, knowing that their story is far from over. The wheels of history are still turning, and the Maisualtin have many more chapters to write in the saga of the Aztec Empire. As the sun set over the bustling Chinempers, casting its golden hue over the fields, a different kind of glow emanated from the heart of Tenochtitlan, one that wasn't born from sweat or toil, but from the spark of ideas. Enter the Tenochtitlan, the Aztec philosophers and intellectual elite, who, unlike the Maisualtin with their calloused hands, wielded the power of the mind. These were the thinkers who dared to ask the big questions, the Socratic gadflies of the Aztec world, if you will. Their domain wasn't the fields or the marketplace. It was the calm of a codex-filled study, where they pondered the mysteries of the universe and the intricacies of human nature. Now, don't let the serene image of philosophers in contemplation fool you into thinking their lives were a stroll through a metaphorical garden of enlightenment. The Telamitinaim navigated the complex social and political labyrinth of Tenochtitlan with the agility of a jaguar on caffeine. Their role was far from ceremonial. These thinkers were the architects of Aztec thought, shaping the empire's cultural and moral compass with a steady hand. They delved into the realms of theology, politics, and ethics, crafting a worldview that was as intricate as the patterns on a Teotihuacan mural. But let's get to the heart of the matter. What exactly did the Telamitinaim teach? Their philosophy was a rich tapestry woven from the threads of Aztec mythology and existential inquiry. They explored topics like the nature of the gods, the meaning of life, and the cyclical nature of time. Their teachings were not just abstract musings. They were the bedrock of Aztec education and religion. For instance, they emphasized the concept of inti lili inti lapili, a phrase that translates to the black ink and the red ink, symbolizing the written word and the wisdom it conveys. It's a reminder that knowledge was power long before the digital age made it a hashtag. Education in Tenochtitlan was not a privilege of the few, it was a duty of the state. The Telamitinaim were at the helm of this intellectual ship, steering the course of education for both noble and commoner children. Boys were sent to Khmer, the schools for the sons of nobility, where they learned not just reading and writing, but also the art of warfare, governance, and the finer points of court etiquette. Meanwhile, the Tulpachkeli, or House of Youth, catered to the commoners, focusing on practical skills and military training. It was a system that ensured the empire had both the brains and the brawn to sustain its grandeur. Now, if you're picturing a harmonious world where philosophers were revered like rock stars, let's hit pause and inject a dose of reality. The Telamitinaim walked a fine line between reverence and danger. Their proximity to power meant they were often embroiled in the intricate dance of political intrigue. Imagine balancing a codex in one hand and a metaphorical dagger in the other, all while keeping your toga, or in this case, your tilmatli, clean. Their influence was undeniable, but it came with the constant risk of falling out of favor with the Telatoni, or the priestly class. Speaking of priests, the Telamitinaim had a complex relationship with the religious authorities of the time. While both groups were keepers of knowledge, their methods often clashed like tectonic plates under Lake Texcoco. The priests, with their ritualistic precision and divine mandates, sometimes viewed the philosophers' more abstract musings with suspicion. After all, questioning the nature of the gods could easily be seen as a threat to the established order. Yet, it was this very tension that fueled the philosophical fire, pushing the Telamitinaim to explore the boundaries of thought and tradition. One of the standout figures among the Telamitinaim was Nezahualcoyotl, the philosopher king of Texcoco, a neighboring city-state of Tenochtitlan. This guy was the Renaissance man of his time, poet, architect, and ruler all rolled into one feathered headdress. His philosophical poetry delved into themes that would resonate through the ages, questioning the impermanence of life and the nature of the divine. Imagine a mashup of Nietzsche and Rumi with a dash of Aztec flair. His works, though poetic, were laced with profound insights into the human condition, serving as a philosophical bridge between the earthly and the divine. But let's not get swept away by the romantic notion of philosopher kings and poetic musings. The reality was that the Telamitinaim operated in a world where their ideas had to serve a purpose beyond intellectual stimulation. Their teachings were intricately linked to the Aztec worldview, which held that the universe was in a constant state of balance, teetering on the edge of chaos. It was the duty of every Aztec, from the Telatoni to the humblest Maisuali, to maintain this cosmic equilibrium through ritual, sacrifice, and a deep understanding of their place in the grand tapestry of existence. And here's where the Telamitinaim truly shone. They provided the intellectual framework that justified and explained the Aztec rituals and sacrifices, which to modern eyes might seem brutal. To the Aztecs, however, these acts were not barbaric, but essential to the continued survival of the universe. The Telamitinaim's teachings helped embed these practices within a coherent philosophical system, making sense of the seemingly senseless and providing a narrative that justified the empire's most controversial traditions. Yet, for all their wisdom, the Tenochtitlan were not immune to the winds of change sweeping across the Aztec world. The arrival of European explorers would soon challenge everything they held dear, introducing new ideas and technologies that would upend the delicate balance they had worked so hard to maintain. The philosophers of Tenochtitlan, with their ink-stained hands and minds full of ancient wisdom, would find themselves facing questions they never anticipated, questions that would reshape the very core of their civilization. So, as we leave the Tenochtitlan deep in thought, pondering the mysteries of the cosmos and the intricacies of human nature, we find ourselves at a crossroads in the story of Tenochtitlan. The wheels of history are turning, and the Aztec Empire stands on the brink of dramatic change as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the Chinampas and the city's towering temples. We can only wonder what the future holds for this remarkable civilization and its wise philosophers. But for now, let's leave them to their contemplations, knowing that their story, and the story of Tenochtitlan, is far from over. And so, with the Tenochtitlan lost in contemplation, we turn our gaze to the broader tapestry of Aztec society, a vibrant mosaic woven from ambition, ingenuity, and a pinch of ruthlessness. If Tenochtitlan was the crown jewel of the Aztec Empire, then its social hierarchy was the intricate setting that held the gem in place. But like all things in life, this hierarchy was both a blessing and a curse, a double-edged macuahuitl, if you will. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Aztec social mobility, or rather, glaring lack thereof. In a world where your birth often sealed your fate tighter than a Spanish galleon's hull, the Aztec class system was, shall we say, firmly entrenched. At the top we had our feather-clad nobility, the Pipiltin, whose lives were a parade of privileges. They were the owners of land, the takers of tribute, the wearers of the finest cotton garments, and they liked it that way. For them, social mobility wasn't just a non-issue. It was an existential threat. After all, why fix what isn't broken when you're the one sipping cacao in a palace? Below the nobles were the Macehualtin, the commoners, who, despite their indispensable role in Tenochtitlan's day-to-day operations, got the short end of the obsidian stick when it came to upward mobility. Sure, there were tales of commoners rising through acts of valor in battle or exceptional skill in crafts, but these stories were rarer than a rainstorm in the Atacama. For most Macehualtin, life was a continuous loop of labor, tribute, and military service. It wasn't exactly the stuff of Horatio Alger novels. Then we had the Tlacatin, or slaves, whose circumstances were harsher than a Toltec winter. Yet, in an ironic twist, they sometimes enjoyed more social mobility than the commoners. By paying off debts or performing exceptional service, a slave could earn freedom, a concept that seems almost progressive until you remember the starting point was, well, slavery. Now, let's address the elephant in the Chinampa. Why was this system so rigid? The answer lies in the empire's very foundation. The Aztecs built their society like they built their city, on a precarious patch of land that required constant vigilance and control. The social hierarchy ensured stability, hierarchy, and let's face it, control over the masses. The nobles needed a steady stream of tribute and labor to maintain their opulent lifestyle and fund the empire's insatiable appetite for expansion and warfare. This rigidity was both a stabilizing force and a ticking time bomb. It's easy to romanticize Tenochtitlan as a harmonious paradise of floating gardens and feathered headdresses, but the reality was as gritty as it was grand. The very system that kept the empire running like a well-oiled atlatl also sowed the seeds of its downfall. As the empire expanded, so did its appetite for resources, tribute, and conquest. The Aztecs were caught in a cycle of expansion that wasn't sustainable, a bit like trying to fit a jaguar into a hummingbird's nest. The social structure, while providing stability, also stifled innovation and adaptability. When Hernan Cortés and his band of merry conquistadors arrived on the scene in 1519, they were met with a society that, despite its grandeur, was brittle beneath the surface. The rigid class system left little room for the kind of rapid adaptation needed to counter the European threat. As Cortés and his forces leveraged alliances with disgruntled tribes and unleashed diseases that devastated the native population, the cracks in the Aztec foundation widened into chasms. So, what can modern societies learn from the Aztec experience? For starters, the lesson that a rigid social hierarchy, while effective in maintaining short-term order, can prove disastrous in the long run. Societies thrive on adaptability, flexibility, and the ability to innovate. The Aztecs' reliance on a fixed social order left them ill-prepared for the tectonic shifts that came with European contact. Moreover, the Aztecs remind us that the strength of a civilization lies not just in its leaders or its warriors, but in the resilience and ingenuity of its people. The Macehualtin, with their tireless labor and quiet determination, were the real backbone of the empire, and their stories, though often overlooked, hold valuable lessons for us today. In a world that often prizes spectacle over substance, it's the everyday heroes who keep the wheels of society turning. And so, as we bid farewell to Tenochtitlan, let's remember both its splendor and its shadows. The city was a testament to human ingenuity, a marvel of engineering and ambition built on a lake, a city that dared to dream big and reach for the stars. Yet, it was also a cautionary tale of what happens when the very structures that sustain us become the chains that bind us. As the dust of history settles over the ruins of Tenochtitlan, we're left with a vivid tableau of a society that soared to great heights and fell just as spectacularly. The Aztec Empire, for all its might and majesty, was ultimately a fragile colossus standing on clay feet. Its story is a poignant reminder that even the greatest civilizations are mortal, subject to the whims of fate, time, and the ever-turning wheel of history. With that, we leave the Aztecs to their place in the annals of time. A civilization that, though gone, continues to intrigue and inspire us with its legacy of wonder and warning. And as we step back into our own world, let's take a cue from the Aztecs. Dare to dream audaciously, but never forget the ground beneath your feet. After all, even the mightiest empire is only as strong as its foundations. Ever have one of those projects that spirals out of control, where your quick weekend renovation turns into a multi-decade epic saga? Welcome to the Khmer Empire in the 12th century, the overachievers of Southeast Asia who decided a simple temple wouldn't cut it. Nope, they went full throttle and built Angkor, a colossal stone symphony that would give even the pyramids a run for their money. This wasn't just any construction project, it was a logistical Rubik's Cube without the cheat sheet. First, let's talk numbers, because what's history without a bit of jaw-dropping math? Angkor Wat is made up of roughly 1,626,000 cubic meters of sandstone. That's a lot of rock, folks. If you're wondering where they found all that sandstone, here's the kicker. It was quarried over 50 kilometers away. That's like hauling your building materials from the next town over, without the luxury of trucks or highways. The Khmer had to rely on boats, elephants, and sheer willpower. Imagine the project manager of this colossal endeavor trying to explain the timeline and budget over a 12th century version of Zoom. We're talking thousands of workers here, laborers, artisans, engineers, and probably a few monks offering up prayers for good measure. Speaking of logistics, the budget for this project could make medieval accountants break into a cold sweat. The empire poured resources into Angkor Wat like it was the original tech startup, aiming for divine profitability in the form of religious and imperial prestige. And the timeline, decades. That's right, they didn't just throw this thing up in a few summers. It was a marathon, not a sprint. Construction started during the reign of King Suryavarman II and continued well after his reign had ended. If you were born at the start of the project, by the time it wrapped up, you'd be old enough to complain about how kids these days didn't appreciate a good temple like they used to. Now, let's take a look at the workforce. Thousands of people were involved, each with a role that would make modern-day project managers weep with envy or terror, from the stone cutters to the water managers who had to ensure that the vast hydraulic system, yes, there was an intricate water system, kept everything running smoothly. This was not just a temple, it was a city unto itself, a testament to the Khmer's grand vision, and let's face it, their penchant for over-the-top projects. But why go through all this trouble? Well, aside from wanting to impress the neighbors and the guards, Angkor Wat was a symbol of political and religious legitimacy. King Suryavarman II wasn't just building a temple, he was crafting a legacy, a stone proclamation of divine right and earthly power. Angkor Wat was designed to reflect the Hindu universe, with its central tower representing Mount Meru, the home of the gods. Talk about a power move. Of course, we can't overlook the myth-busting aspect of this story. While the romantic vision of Angkor Wat is one of divine inspiration and artistic mastery, the reality is a bit more gritty. Behind the grandeur, there were undoubtedly harsh working conditions, back-breaking labor, and a social hierarchy that kept the wheels of construction turning. The Khmer Empire, like any great society, had its share of inequalities and challenges, and Angkor Wat was both a testament to its greatness and a reminder of its complexities. In the end, Angkor Wat stands today not just as an architectural marvel, but as a monument to human ambition and ingenuity. It's a survivor of history, having withstood centuries of change, conflict, and the relentless march of time. So next time you're facing a daunting project, just remember, at least you don't have to build Angkor Wat without email. Now, let's dive into the real MVP of the Khmer Empire, rice. If you thought Angkor Wat was impressive, wait till you hear about the agricultural wizardry that powered this empire. Forget gold or spices. For the Khmer, rice was the true currency. It was more than just a side dish. It was the economic lifeblood that fueled a population explosion and helped build an empire that could throw shade at its neighbors. We're talking about an ingenious irrigation system that would make modern engineers nod in appreciation. The Khmer developed a network of canals, reservoirs, and embankments that turned the landscape into one massive, fertile rice paddy. Picture this, a hydraulic city where water flowed as precisely as a Swiss watch, ensuring that every grain of rice reached its full potential. These systems weren't just about keeping the rice paddies wet. They were about manipulating water levels to get multiple harvests per year, 3 to be precise. That's like having a money tree in your backyard, folks. This agricultural prowess didn't just happen overnight. It required an intimate understanding of the monsoon seasons and the land's topography, not to mention a labor force that could handle the grunt work. Here's a little data point for you. The West Barre, one of the largest reservoirs, holds about 50 million cubic meters of water. That's enough to fill 20,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Imagine explaining that to someone in the 12th century who just wants to know what an Olympic is. Now, you might be wondering, why all this fuss about rice? Well, it's simple. More rice means more people, and more people mean more power. It was the engine behind a demographic boom that saw the Khmer Empire's population soar to numbers that could rival some modern cities. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, all supported by this agricultural bonanza. While the rest of the world was dealing with famines and food shortages, the Khmer were basically hosting an all-you-can-eat rice buffet. But rice wasn't just for the locals. The surplus allowed the Khmer to engage in trade with far-off lands like China and India. Imagine the bustling trade routes, where caravans and ships carried not just sacks of rice, but also ideas, technologies, and exotic goods. Spices, precious metals, textiles, you name it, they traded it. These routes were the ancient world's version of the internet, connecting cultures and spreading innovations faster than you can say Silk Road. And let's not forget the cultural exchange that came with these trade networks. The Khmer absorbed influences from their trading partners, integrating new art forms, religious ideas, and technologies into their own society. It was like the original global melting pot, long before fusion cuisine was a thing. This cultural cross-pollination enriched the Khmer civilization, giving it a cosmopolitan flair that set it apart from its neighbors. However, let's not romanticize the situation too much. While the trade routes brought prosperity and diversity, they also brought challenges and competition. Maintaining these networks required a strong military presence and strategic alliances, which is a polite way of saying the Khmer had to be ready to flex their muscles when necessary. It was a delicate balance of diplomacy and dominance, like playing a geopolitical chess game where the stakes were as high as the rice harvests. Speaking of challenges, the irrigation systems, while impressive, required constant maintenance. A single breach in the system could spell disaster, turning fertile fields into parched wastelands. The labor involved in keeping these systems running was immense, and it wasn't exactly a cushy desk job. We're talking back-breaking work under the scorching sun, with the looming threat of monsoon floods ready to undo months of labor in a heartbeat. It's the kind of job that makes modern office work look like a vacation. In the grand scheme of things, the Khmer Empire's economic engine was a marvel of its time. It combined agricultural innovation, trade savvy, and cultural adaptability in a way that few civilizations could match. Yet, for all its brilliance, it was also a reminder of the empire's vulnerabilities. The very systems that brought prosperity were also potential weak points, requiring constant vigilance and effort to maintain. As we continue our journey through the history of the Khmer Empire, remember that behind every grand temple and every bustling market was a society deeply dependent on the land and the ingenuity of its people. The story of the Khmer isn't just about monumental achievements and glorious conquests. It's also about the day-to-day realities of sustaining an empire in a world where nature and human ambition are in constant flux. But hold that thought, because there's more to uncover about this fascinating civilization. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll delve deeper into the intricacies of Khmer society and the forces that shaped its destiny. So, as we stroll further into the intricate maze of Khmer society, let's pause to admire the grand chessboard of politics and religion where kings played for keeps. The Khmer Empire wasn't just about temples and rice paddies. It was a complex organism where divine kingship and stratified society danced a delicate tango. Imagine a world where the king wasn't just a ruler, but a demigod walking the earth, a concept that makes even the most egotistical modern leaders look humble in comparison. At the heart of this cosmic drama was the divine kingship model. Now, this isn't just a fancy title. It was a full-on religious and political doctrine. The king was seen as the earthly representative of the gods, particularly Shiva or Vishnu, depending on the religious flavor of the day. King Suryavarman II, the mastermind behind Angkor Wat, wasn't just building temples. He was crafting a celestial LinkedIn profile, showcasing his divine credentials to both his subjects and the deities above. Talk about networking. This divine status was more than just ceremonial. It was a strategic tool, a way to legitimize power and silence dissent. If you questioned the king's decisions, you weren't just being a political rebel. You were committing heresy. It's like the ultimate, because I said so, argument, backed by celestial endorsements. If only modern politicians had that kind of leverage. Imagine the tweets. But let's not be entirely cynical. This model had deep roots in the religious beliefs of the time. Hinduism and later Buddhism weren't just personal faiths, but political instruments. They provided the ideological glue that held the empire together. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were powerhouses of economic and cultural activity, bolstering the king's divine claim. Think of them as the medieval version of a political campaign headquarters, where the message was eternal salvation rather than tax reform. Now, the Khmer Empire wasn't a monolithic entity, and the balance of power wasn't always stable. The society was highly stratified, with layers upon layers of social classes, each with its own role and status. At the top, you had the king and the royal family, followed by the high-ranking officials and priests who administered the state's vast bureaucracy. Then came the artisans, traders, and farmers who kept the economic engine humming, much like the middle class today. And at the bottom, you had the laborers and slaves, whose toil built the empire's grandeur but often went uncelebrated. This hierarchy was both a source of strength and a potential Achilles heel. On one hand, it allowed for efficient governance and resource allocation. On the other, it sowed seeds of discontent. An empire is only as strong as its weakest link, and the lower classes often bore the brunt of economic hardship and military drafts. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant vigilance and occasionally a firm hand to maintain. Speaking of firm hands, let's dive into the personalities that shaped this empire. Enter King Suryavarman II, the architect of Angkor Wat and a political maestro. He wasn't just a king, he was a statesman, a military leader, and a religious innovator. Under his reign, the Khmer Empire reached new heights, expanding its territory and influence across Southeast Asia. Suryavarman was known for his sharp intellect and strategic acumen, qualities that earned him both admiration and fear. If he were alive today, he'd probably be the kind of leader who could crash Twitter with a single decree, #divine right. But let's not romanticize him too much. Suryavarman's reign wasn't all grand temples and glorious conquests. It was also marked by internal strife and external threats. He had to deal with rebellious vassals, ambitious court officials, and neighboring kingdoms eager to test the empire's mettle. It was a high-stakes game, and not everyone played by the rules. In many ways, his reign was a testament to the tightrope walk of maintaining power in a world where alliances were as fickle as the monsoon rains. As we explore the influence of religion in Khmer politics, it's essential to recognize how Buddhism began to weave its threads into the fabric of the empire. By the time of Jayavarman Roman VII, Buddhism had gained significant traction, offering a softer, more introspective alternative to the often rigid Hindu doctrines. This wasn't just a spiritual shift, it was a political one, as Buddhism provided a unifying ideology in a diverse and expansive empire. Monasteries became centers of learning and social services, offering a counterbalance to the royal court's power. They were the original think tanks, shaping public opinion and policy through a blend of religious and philosophical teachings. But don't be fooled into thinking this was a peaceful transition. The shift from Hinduism to Buddhism wasn't always smooth, and it involved its share of political maneuvering and controversy. Kings had to navigate these religious waters carefully, balancing the old guard's expectations with the new wave's enthusiasm. It's a reminder that even in ancient times, religion and politics were inseparable bedfellows, each influencing the other in a complex dance of power and belief. In this grand theater of the Khmer Empire, every player had a role, every move was calculated, and every decision could mean the difference between prosperity and collapse. The divine kingship model, the stratified society, and the religious landscape were all pieces of a larger puzzle, one that continues to intrigue historians and laypeople alike. As we peel back the layers of this fascinating civilization, we see not just the grandeur of its achievements, but also the gritty reality of its challenges. So, as we wrap up this segment of our journey, let's keep in mind that the Khmer Empire was more than just a collection of temples or a series of conquests. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped by its leaders, its people, and the shifting sands of time. It's a story that's far from over, with more twists and turns waiting in the wings. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more history left to uncover. As we peel back the layers of the Khmer Empire, let's shine a spotlight on Angkor Wat itself, the crown jewel of this ancient civilization and a magnet for modern conspiracy theories. It's time to address the cosmic elephant in the room. No, Angkor Wat was not built by aliens. I know it's disappointing for those hoping for a Spielbergian twist, but history is often stranger and more fascinating than fiction. Let's get real. Angkor Wat is a testament to human ingenuity, not extraterrestrial intervention. The architects and builders behind this masterpiece were experts in their field, not space tourists. Sure, the precision of its construction and the sheer scale might seem otherworldly, but credit where credit's due. The Khmer were master builders. This isn't some ancient episode of Extreme Makeover, Temple Edition, with aliens swooping in to lend a hand. The only thing otherworldly here was the vision and skill of the Khmer themselves. Now, let's talk about the blend of art and astronomy in Angkor Wat's design. This isn't just a pile of rocks arranged for aesthetic pleasure. It's a stone calendar, a celestial calculator that aligns with the stars. The temple is oriented to the west, which is unusual for a Hindu temple. This alignment isn't just for dramatic sunsets. It reflects the temple's connection to the Hindu god Vishnu and the cycle of the cosmos. Think of it as ancient astronomy meets spiritual architecture. The central tower of Angkor Wat represents Mount Meru, the mythical center of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. From this central point, the temple's layout mirrors the Hindu mandala, a cosmic diagram that symbolizes the universe itself. It's like a cosmic blueprint, etched in stone, designed to channel divine energy. While modern architects might reach for CAD software, the Khmer used the cosmos as their design template. Talk about thinking outside the box, or in this case, outside the planet. Primary sources from the time reveal how Angkor Wat was perceived in its heyday. Inscriptions and carvings tell us that this was more than just a place of worship. It was a symbol of divine legitimacy and earthly power. The temple's bas-reliefs depict scenes from Hindu epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, blending storytelling with spiritual instruction. Its history, religion, and art rolled into one, a kind of ancient multimedia experience, minus the Wi-Fi. But let's not ignore the gritty realities. Behind the divine imagery and celestial alignments, there were thousands of laborers who toiled under the scorching sun, carving each block with precision. This was no walk in the park. It was backbreaking work, driven by the vision of rulers who saw Angkor Wat as a key to immortality. The social hierarchy ensured that while the upper echelons enjoyed the spiritual fruits, the lower classes did the heavy lifting, literally. Fast forward to today, and Angkor Wat is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, drawing millions of tourists each year. But even back in the medieval days, it was a spiritual and economic hub. You might think of medieval marketing as an oxymoron, but the Khmer were ahead of their time. They knew how to draw a crowd, blending religious fervor with economic savvy to make Angkor Wat a must-visit destination. Pilgrims and traders from all over Asia flocked to this temple complex, contributing to a bustling local economy. It was the medieval version of a tourist hotspot, complete with souvenirs, though instead of fridge magnets, you might be bringing home a blessed amulet. This blend of spirituality and commerce wasn't just a happy accident, it was a calculated strategy. The Khmer knew that by attracting pilgrims, they'd also attract traders, scholars, and artisans, creating a vibrant cultural melting pot. It was like the original influencer strategy, using divine clout to boost foot traffic and fill the coffers. Religion was the hook, but commerce was the line that reeled in prosperity. So, while modern myths might paint Angkor Wat as a product of alien hands or supernatural forces, the reality is far more grounded and infinitely more impressive. It's a testament to human ambition, a stone symphony of art, astronomy, and engineering that continues to captivate us. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Khmer Empire, let's remember that behind every grand achievement is a tapestry of human effort, vision, and innovation. And with that, leave Angkor Wat behind, not forever, just for now. Our journey through the Khmer Empire is far from over, and there are more tales to tell, more mysteries to unravel. Stay tuned, because the story of the Khmer is as intricate and enduring as the carvings on Angkor Wat's walls. As we bid a temporary farewell to Angkor Wat, let's pivot to a less glamorous but equally crucial chapter of the Khmer Empire, the decline. Imagine the empire as a mighty river, once roaring with power, now a trickle facing the dry season. The reasons for its decline are as complex as the irrigation systems that once fed its glory, with a mix of environmental missteps, political hiccups, and a touch of cosmic irony. First, let's talk Mother Nature. The Khmer's sophisticated water management system, which was their lifeline, might have been their Achilles heel. Studies suggest that climate change, no, not the modern kind, but a medieval version, played a part. Around the 14th and 15th centuries, the region experienced severe droughts followed by catastrophic floods. It was like Mother Nature decided to play a cruel game of will it float with the empire. These climatic tantrums wreaked havoc on the irrigation systems, turning once fertile paddies into cracked wastelands. The empire's agricultural prowess, previously its greatest asset, became a liability. Imagine a high-stakes game of Jenga. Pull out the wrong block, like consistent water supply, and the whole structure teeters. The Khmer were left scrambling to repair the damage, but nature was playing a different game, one with no rulebook and no mercy. Of course, environmental woes weren't the only players on this stage. Political instability added its own brand of chaos. The divine right of kings might sound impressive, but it didn't guarantee competent leadership. Succession disputes became as common as rice paddies, with rival factions battling for the throne like a medieval version of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with just as much drama. As internal squabbles intensified, the once unified empire began to fracture. Provincial governors, once loyal to the central authority, started acting like independent kings. It's as if the empire was a giant pizza, and everyone wanted a bigger slice, crust and all. This decentralization meant that resources were stretched thin, and the empire's ability to fend off external threats diminished. Neighboring kingdoms, ever the opportunists, were more than happy to nibble at the edges, further eroding Khmer power. Enter the Ayutthaya kingdom, the Khmer's neighbor to the west, eager to expand its influence. In 1431, they sacked Angkor, delivering a blow that was as much psychological as it was physical. While the Khmer managed to regroup and relocate their capital to Phnom Penh, the move signaled a shift from the grandiosity of Angkor to a more modest existence. It's like going from a penthouse suite to a studio apartment. Not ideal, but you make do. Despite its decline, the Khmer Empire left an indelible mark on history, with Angkor Wat as its enduring legacy. Today, the temple stands as a symbol of Cambodia's national identity and a testament to human creativity. It draws over 2 million visitors annually, all eager to witness firsthand the grandeur of an empire that once was. It's a pilgrimage site for history buffs and spiritual seekers alike, a place where the past and present collide in a dance as intricate as the carvings on its walls. Globally, Angkor Wat has become a cultural icon, influencing everything from architecture to pop culture. It's appeared in video games, documentaries, and even served as a backdrop for Hollywood blockbusters. It's the ancient world's equivalent of going viral, reminding us that true art transcends time and space. Reflecting on the rise and fall of the Khmer Empire offers valuable insights into our modern world. The challenges they faced, from resource management to political stability, are eerily similar to those we grapple with today. Substitute irrigation system with infrastructure and succession dispute with political polarization, and the parallels become strikingly clear. The Khmer story serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of sustainable practices and adaptive governance. Their achievements remind us that human ingenuity can overcome tremendous odds, but their decline warns us of the dangers of complacency and environmental neglect. It's a narrative as old as time. Adapt or face the consequences. In the end, the Khmer Empire's legacy is both a celebration and a lesson. It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry of human experience, woven with threads of triumph and tragedy. As we marvel at their architectural feats and learn from their missteps, we're reminded that history, with all its grandeur and pitfalls, continues to teach us valuable lessons. So, as we close the book on the Khmer Empire, let's carry forward its story, not just as a relic of the past, but as a beacon for the future. Because in the grand scheme of things, the lessons of history are as timeless as the stones of Angkor Wat, whispering truths across the ages to those willing to listen. And who knows? Perhaps, somewhere in the echoes of the past, we'll find the keys to building a more sustainable and harmonious future. In the dim mists of early Roman history, where myth and fact rub elbows more than they should, the concept of law was as nebulous as a Roman fog. The budding city on the Tiber River was more of a legal Wild West than the orderly empire it would later become. Back in the days of the Roman kingdom, roughly from 753 to 509 BCE, laws were less about what's written down and more about who you could schmooze at the local forum. Forget the polished statutes. It was all about knowing the right people and navigating a sea of customs and traditions. At the top of this legal food chain sat the Rex, or king, a title that sounds impressive but really meant you were the one everyone blamed when things went south. The king was the ultimate judge and lawmaker, a role that came with all the perks and pitfalls of being the big cheese. The king's word was law, literally, because back then they didn't bother writing this stuff down. Why clutter the marble with scribbles when you could just announce it loudly and hope everyone was sober enough to remember? The Roman kingdom wasn't exactly a democracy. It was more like a family reunion where one uncle gets to decide everything because he's the one with the biggest house. The patricians, Rome's aristocratic elite, were the ones with the power and the property. They ran the show with a kind of because I said so attitude that would make any toddler proud. The plebeians, the common folk, meanwhile, were left to navigate this legal maze with little more than a prayer and a few good connections. But let's not paint the plebeians as hapless peasants forever at the mercy of their patrician overlords. These folks knew how to make some noise. Enter the 12 tables, the result of one of the earliest known cases of people demanding a little transparency from their rulers. Around 450 BCE, the plebeians had had enough of the legal shenanigans. They wanted laws that weren't just whispered among the elite like juicy gossip at a dinner party. The demand was simple. Put it in writing, for Jove's sake. The plebeians wanted laws that were clear, consistent, and most importantly, accessible to everyone, not just those with a family tree that looked like a who's who of Roman nobility. This wasn't just about justice. It was about survival in a society where ignorance of the law wasn't just bliss. It was downright dangerous. The 12 tables were born out of this demand for clarity. Think of them as the ancient Roman version of a FAQ page, but with more Latin and fewer cat memes. They were engraved on bronze tablets and displayed in the Roman Forum, the ancient equivalent of posting the rules on your fridge door for everyone to see and hopefully adhere to. The creation of the 12 tables was a game changer, but getting there was no walk in the park. It was more like a marathon through a swamp. The plebeians' push for written laws was met with resistance from the patricians, who weren't exactly thrilled at the idea of giving up their legal monopoly. It took a decade of political wrangling, a few well-placed threats, and probably more than a few amphorae of wine to finally get everyone on the same page, literally. Once completed, these tables covered everything from property rights to how to handle a neighbor who decided your backyard was a great place for his goats. They laid the groundwork for Roman law and introduced the idea that laws should be public and apply to everyone, not just those who could trace their lineage back to a founding myth or two. Despite the romantic allure of a system where everyone knew the rules, the reality was still a bit murky. The plebeians had won a significant victory, but the patricians still held most of the cards. After all, knowledge of the law is one thing, but having the power to enforce it is another game altogether. As a foundation of Roman justice, the 12 tables remind us that the road to legal equality is long and winding, often paved with the grumbling of those who'd rather keep things exclusive. But they also show that even in an ancient world governed by tradition and hierarchy, the call for fairness and transparency can spark change. And like any good story of justice, it's one where the underdogs, armed with determination and a knack for negotiation, manage to scribble their demands into history, one bronze tablet at a time. So, as the ink, or in this case, the chisel, was drying on the 12 tables, Rome was already on the cusp of another seismic shake-up. The Roman kingdom, that grand old house of cards, was about to topple, making way for the Republic. The year was 509 BCE, and Rome was saying arrivederci to kings and salve to a republic, a transition that was less about smooth sailing and more about navigating turbulent political seas with a homemade raft. Now, let's set the stage. The Roman kingdom was out, and the fresh-faced republic was in, like the new kid in school who thinks they can change the world just by sitting at a different cafeteria table. This transition wasn't just a political makeover. It was a complete overhaul, a societal metamorphosis that promised a more inclusive legal system. But let's not get too starry-eyed. This wasn't a utopian leap. It was more like a shuffle towards something slightly less exclusive. The 12 tables were the Republic's legal backbone, but the reality of Roman law was as complex as a soap opera plot. Sure, the plebeians had their laws carved in bronze, but interpretation was still largely up to the patricians, those crafty aristocrats who seemed to have a monopoly on both land and legal know-how. It's like writing the rules of monopoly on a board, but letting the banker decide what go really means. The Republic's legal system was an evolving beast, with various assemblies and magistrates playing roles that were part political theatre, part serious governance. The Senate, that august body of Rome's elite, was the nerve centre of power. Imagine a room full of men in togas, each with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, debating laws like they were deciding on what toppings to get for the Senate's pizza party. Their decisions had real consequences, and they were the ones who got to interpret those shiny new laws. Let's talk about loopholes, those delightful quirks of the legal system that have been around as long as there have been laws to loop through. The 12 tables were no exception. Whether it was finding creative ways to interpret property rights or inventing new methods to dodge taxes, the Romans loved a good legal loophole. It was almost a national pastime, right up there with chariot racing and watching gladiators beat each other senseless. The plebeians, ever the resourceful underdogs, weren't going to sit quietly while the patricians played legal hopscotch. They knew how to push back, and push they did, often quite literally. The conflict of the orders, a series of socio-political struggles between the plebeians and patricians, was like a centuries-long game of tug-of-war, with real stakes and no referees. In 494 BCE, the plebeians took a bold step, akin to flipping the game board in frustration. They staged the first of several secessions, essentially saying, if we can't have a say in the rules, we're taking our ball and going home. And by home, I mean they withdrew from the city to the sacred mount, leaving the patricians in a bit of a lurch. After all, a city needs its workers, soldiers, and taxpayers. Without the plebeians, Rome was like a car without wheels, going nowhere fast. This plebeian power move led to the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs, a position that became a critical check on patrician power. The tribunes had the right to veto, literally, I forbid, any decision by a magistrate or the senate that they deemed harmful to the plebs. It was like giving the plebeians a magic wand to wave away bad laws, a small but significant win in the ongoing struggle for equality. Despite these advances, the patricians weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet for plebeian demands. Each concession was hard-won, often requiring a blend of negotiation, persistence, and just the right amount of public pressure. The legal system of the Republic, while more structured than the chaotic kingdom era, was still a battleground of interests. It was a system where the elite often decided what justice looked like, and justice for all sometimes morphed into justice for those who can afford a good lawyer. The 12 tables themselves, while a monumental step towards a codified legal system, were not without their critics. Some Romans saw them as too rigid, like a toga that's just a tad too tight. Nevertheless, they laid important groundwork for Roman law and influenced legal systems for centuries to come, providing a framework that other cultures would build upon and adapt. The transition from kingdom to republic was a defining period, a time when Rome was learning to walk the tightrope between tradition and innovation, between the power of the few and the rights of the many. It was a complex dance, one that involved more than a few missteps and the occasional fall flat on their toga-clad faces. Yet, out of this messiness emerged a system that, despite its flaws, was groundbreaking for its time. And so, as Rome continued its journey through history, the 12 tables stood as a testament to the power of the written word, a reminder that even in a world dominated by the mighty and the few, the voices of the many could carve their demands into the very foundation of society. As we dive deeper into the Republic's story, we'll see how these laws and the political structures they inspired continue to shape Rome's destiny, setting the stage for an empire that would echo through the ages. But remember, this is just the beginning of Rome's legal saga, and the road ahead is filled with intrigue, power plays, and the eternal quest for justice, or at least a version of it that everyone could agree on. As Rome's legal saga unfolded, the Republic found itself at the height of its influence, stretching its toga-clad arms across the Mediterranean like a power-hungry octopus. It was a time when Roman law was as much about keeping the empire glued together as it was about keeping the local baker from shortchanging you on your daily loaf. The Republic was in full expansion mode, gobbling up territories faster than a centurion at an all-you-can-eat banquet. This meant that Roman law had to adapt, or at least try to, across diverse cultures and landscapes, from the sun-baked sands of North Africa to the misty hills of Britannia. Now, let's get one thing straight. Adapting Roman law to new territories was about as straightforward as reading Latin backwards while riding a chariot. The Romans faced the Herculean task of administering justice across thousands of miles without the luxury of Google Docs or Zoom calls. Instead, they relied on a mix of local governance, Roman oversight, and a hefty dose of good old-fashioned bureaucracy. Imagine trying to file your taxes when the nearest office is a 2-week donkey ride away, and you start to get the picture. The Romans were nothing if not pragmatic, and they realized early on that a one-size-fits-all legal system just wasn't going to cut it. Instead, they employed a system known as *just gentium*, or the law of nations, a kind of legal Esperanto that allowed them to deal with non-citizens while still maintaining a semblance of order. This was essentially Roman law's attempt at being cosmopolitan, like hosting a dinner party and making sure there's a vegetarian option for your cousin from Carthage. But while the Romans were busy trying to appear inclusive, they were also quite protective of their own legal privileges. Roman citizens enjoyed the benefits of *just civile*, the civil law, which was a bit like having a VIP pass to the legal theme park. Non-citizens, on the other hand, were often left to navigate the more ambiguous waters of *just gentium*, which could be as clear as mud on a good day. This dual system of law was a clever way to keep the empire running smoothly while still reminding everyone who was in charge. The expansion of Roman law also had some serious economic implications. As Rome's territories grew, so did its need for resources, taxes, and tribute. The legal system played a crucial role in ensuring that the empire's coffers were kept full. Taxation in the Roman Empire was an art form, with local governors acting as both tax collectors and enforcers. And let's be honest, nothing says, "Welcome to the Roman Empire," quite like a hefty tax bill. Roman law also influenced trade, with *just gentium*, facilitating commerce across the empire. Merchants could travel from the bustling markets of Alexandria to the bustling forums of Rome, knowing that there was a consistent legal framework they could rely on. This was crucial for an empire that relied heavily on trade, both for its economic health and its ability to maintain control over distant provinces. The Romans understood that a steady flow of goods and money was the lifeblood of their empire, and their legal system was the circulatory system that kept it all moving. But let's not get too romantic about this legal juggernaut. The reality was that the expansion of Roman law was often more about control than about justice. Roman governors were notorious for exploiting their positions, using the law to line their own pockets while ensuring that local populations remained compliant. Corruption was as rampant as ever, with bribes and backroom deals as common as gladiatorial games. The Romans also had a knack for legal flexibility, or perhaps more accurately, legal gymnastics. They could interpret laws in ways that would make a modern lawyer's head spin. It was all about maintaining power, both within the empire and in the distant provinces. This was a system where the letter of the law often took a backseat to the whims of those in power, a reality that many a provincial governor was all too happy to exploit. Despite the challenges, the Romans managed to keep their sprawling empire together with a patchwork quilt of laws that, while not always fair, were at least functional. They were masters at adapting to new circumstances, even if it meant bending the rules or inventing new ones altogether. This adaptability was key to their success, allowing them to govern a diverse and often unruly empire without descending into chaos. It's easy to look back at Roman law with a kind of nostalgic admiration, imagining a system that was ahead of its time, a beacon of justice in a world of barbarism. But the truth is far more nuanced. Roman law was as much about maintaining power and control as it was about administering justice. It was a system that could be both progressive and oppressive, fair and corrupt, clear and confusing, all depending on who you were and where you stood in the social hierarchy. As the Republic continued to expand, it laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most powerful empires in history. But with great power came great legal responsibility, and the Romans were nothing if not ambitious in their attempts to meet that challenge. They created a legal system that, while far from perfect, was remarkably sophisticated for its time, influencing countless societies long after the Roman Empire itself had crumbled to dust. So, as we dive deeper into the story of Roman law, remember that this is a tale of ambition and intrigue, of power and pragmatism, of justice and exploitation. It's a story as complex and compelling as the empire it served, and it's far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how Roman law continued to evolve, shaping not just the fate of an empire, but the very foundation of Western legal tradition. Stay tuned, because the plot is about to thicken in ways that even the most cunning Roman senator couldn't have predicted. The Roman Empire, at its zenith, was a sprawling giant, a patchwork quilt of cultures, languages, and legal systems stitched together by the threadbare hope of stability. It was here, amid the chaos and grandeur, that a new chapter of Roman law began to unfold, one that would attempt to bring order to this legal cacophony. Enter Emperor Justinian I, a man with a vision so ambitious, he might as well have been trying to teach a lion to waltz. Justinian, ruling from 527 to 565 CE, was not exactly known for his modesty. He had dreams of restoring the Roman Empire to its former glory, both territorially and legally. The empire, by this time, was a shadow of its former self, more of a legal Frankenstein than the well-oiled machine it once aspired to be. Roman law had become a tangled mess of decrees, edicts, and interpretations, some of which contradicted each other more than a politician at a press conference. Enter the corpus juris civilis, or the body of civil law, Justinian's ambitious legal reform project. Think of it as the ancient world's equivalent of a legal spring cleaning. This was not just a matter of dusting off old scrolls. It was a complete overhaul, a legal tidy-up that would have made Marie Kondo proud. Justinian's goal was to simplify, consolidate, and ultimately codify a legal system that had become as Byzantine as his empire. The Corpus Juris Civilis was divided into 4 parts: the Codex Justinianus, the Digesta or Pandicti, the institutions, and the Narvali constitutions. Each served a specific purpose, and together they formed a comprehensive legal framework that would influence European law for centuries. The Codex was essentially a greatest hits collection of imperial edicts, while the Digest was a more philosophical dive into legal thought, a compilation of writings from Rome's greatest legal minds. The institutes were like a legal primer, a 101 course on Roman law, and the novels, or new laws, were Justinian's own contributions to the legal landscape. But let's not get carried away with visions of a perfectly unified legal system. This was still the Roman Empire, after all, where the gap between theory and practice was often as wide as the Mediterranean Sea. The myth of a unified legal system is just that, a myth. While Justinian's reforms were groundbreaking, they were also largely aspirational. Implementing these laws across an empire that spanned 3 continents and countless cultures was like trying to organize a potluck with guests who can't agree on the menu. The reality was that local customs and legal traditions held sway in many parts of the empire. A Gothic chieftain in Gaul or a Berber leader in North Africa might politely nod at the mention of Roman law, but their day-to-day governance was often more influenced by local norms than by edicts from distant Constantinople. After all, when the nearest Roman official is a month's ride away, it's much easier to adhere to the laws you know than to learn a new set from scratch. Economically, the empire was a behemoth, but with size came the inevitable bureaucratic bloat. Justinian's tax policies were as popular as a toga party, with a strict dress code. His attempts to fund military campaigns and lavish building projects, like the Hagia Sophia, put a strain on imperial finances, and by extension, the pockets of his subjects. Tax collectors were the empire's unsung villains, as reviled as they were necessary. The legal system, therefore, wasn't just about justice. It was also about ensuring the empire's coffers were never empty, at least not for long. Politically, Justinian's reign was a tightrope walk, balancing the interests of a diverse empire while trying to maintain control from the capital. The Nico riots of 532 CE, a massive rebellion sparked by chariot racing factions, showed just how fragile this balance was. Justinian's response, a brutal suppression, was a stark reminder that Roman law, for all its sophistication, was backed by the iron fist of imperial power. The riots were quelled, but not without significant bloodshed, 30,000 lives, to be precise. So, while Justinian's legal reforms were an impressive feat, they were not the panacea he might have hoped. The empire's challenges were as much about human nature as they were about legal codes. Ambition, greed, and the eternal quest for power were as influential as any law, shaping the empire in ways that no amount of legal tidying could fully control. In the end, Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis was more than just a collection of laws. It was a testament to the empire's complexity and resilience. It showed that even in an era without the conveniences of modern technology, a determined ruler could attempt to bring order to chaos, one legal text at a time. Sure, it was imperfect, like trying to play chess with missing pieces, but it was an endeavor that would leave a lasting legacy, influencing the development of legal systems long after the Roman Empire had faded into history. As we continue this journey through Roman legal history, remember that the story of Roman law is as intricate as a mosaic, filled with contradictions, challenges, and the ever-present human element. The narrative doesn't end here, so keep your sandals strapped tightly. There's more to come as we explore the continued evolution of this ancient legal juggernaut. So here we are, at the grand finale of our Roman legal saga. Picture the scene. The dust of history has settled, and we're left with a legal framework that, like an ancient echo, still reverberates through the corridors of modern justice. Roman law wasn't just a set of rules etched in stone or bronze. It was a living, breathing entity that shaped societies long after the empire itself had crumbled into ruins. Think of it as the original legal influencer, setting trends for centuries without ever needing a social media account. Here's the thing. Roman law wasn't just some dusty relic for historians to fawn over. It was a potent force that laid the groundwork for modern legal systems around the globe. We're talking about a legal legacy that spans continents, from the Napoleonic Code in France to the civil law systems of Latin America. Even the common law systems, like those in the United States and the United Kingdom, were not immune to its charms, borrowing concepts like the presumption of innocence and the idea of legal precedent. But let's not get too carried away with romantic notions of Roman legal superiority. Sure, the Romans were ahead of their time, but they were also products of an era where justice was as much about power and control as it was about fairness. The 12 Tables, Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis, and all those other legal milestones were as much about maintaining the status quo as they were about ensuring justice for all. It wasn't just about protecting citizens. It was about protecting the empire's interests. Take the notion of innocent until proven guilty, for example. It's a cornerstone of modern legal systems and one that can trace its origins back to Roman law. But in ancient Rome, this principle was often more theoretical than practical. The reality was that if you were rich and well-connected, your chances of being acquitted were significantly higher than if you were a lowly plebeian. Money and influence were powerful allies in the Roman legal arena, a fact that has a rather familiar ring to it even today. Then there's the romanticized image of Roman courts as bastions of rational debate and legal brilliance. In reality, it could be as chaotic as a modern courtroom drama, complete with all the theatrics and grandstanding one might expect. Trials were often public spectacles, where rhetoric and persuasion mattered just as much, if not more, than the facts of the case. It's a reminder that human nature hasn't changed all that much. We're still suckers for a good story, whether it's told in a toga or a three-piece suit. Economically, Roman law was a tool of empire, a means to facilitate trade, collect taxes, and maintain order across vast territories. The Romans were masters at using the law to their advantage, ensuring that the empire's economic engine kept chugging along. But this wasn't always a benevolent endeavor. Taxation, a necessary evil in any society, was often harsh and punitive, with Roman governors using the law as a cudgel to extract wealth from conquered peoples. It was less about fairness and more about filling the imperial coffers, a tale as old as time. Politically, the legal frameworks established by the Romans were a means to an end, a way to cement their power and influence. The fact that these laws have endured and evolved speaks to their effectiveness, but also to the adaptability of the societies that adopted and modified them. The Roman penchant for pragmatism was a double-edged sword, enabling the empire to govern a diverse population while sowing the seeds of inequity and exploitation that would persist for centuries. As we sit here in the 21st century, it's tempting to view Roman law through rose-colored glasses, to see it as a golden age of justice and reason. But the reality is more complicated. Roman law was a product of its time, reflecting the values and priorities of an empire that was as flawed and contradictory as any society that has come before or since. It was a system that could be both progressive and regressive, a mirror of the human condition in all its complexity. Yet, for all its imperfections, Roman law laid the foundation for legal systems that continue to shape our world. It taught us the importance of codification, of having laws that are clear, consistent, and accessible to all. It introduced concepts like due process and legal representation, ideas that are now so ingrained in our understanding of justice that we often take them for granted. So, as we wrap up this historical journey, let's acknowledge the dual legacy of Roman law. It's a story of ambition and innovation, of power and pragmatism, of justice and injustice. It's a reminder that the quest for fairness and equality is an ongoing struggle, one that requires constant vigilance and adaptation. The Romans, with all their flaws and contradictions, showed us that laws are not just rules to be followed, but living entities that must evolve with the times. As we swap our togas for suits and continue to navigate the complexities of modern justice, let's keep in mind the lessons of Roman law. It's a legacy that challenges us to strive for a system that reflects not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of equity and fairness. Because, at the end of the day, the true measure of a legal system is not in its statutes or precedents, but in its ability to serve the society it governs. And that, my friends, is a principle as relevant today as it was in the age of emperors and gladiators. In the busy markets of ancient Tyre, the scent of cedar wood mingled with the salty breeze of the Mediterranean. There, the Phoenicians, those ancient Mediterranean hustlers, were busy turning trees into treasure. These savvy sailors weren't just playing with wood. They were laying the foundation for a maritime empire that would make Poseidon jealous. The Phoenicians were masters of the sea long before your favorite pirate movie made it cool. They knew that cedar trees weren't just good for building ships. They were cash cows waiting to be milked. With their sturdy vessels, they navigated the Mediterranean like it was their personal playground, leaving a trail of trade and influence that would eventually give rise to Carthage. Now, who were these Phoenicians, you ask? Well, they weren't a unified empire with a catchy slogan or a single ruler. Instead, they were a collection of city-states, each with its own flair for business and a serious thirst for the sea. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, these were the New Yorks and Londons of the ancient world, each competing to be the top dog in maritime trade. They didn't conquer with swords. They let their ships do the talking. And boy, did those ships have a lot to say. They sailed as far as modern-day Spain and possibly even Britain, trading everything from glass beads to the elusive Tyrian purple dye, which was so expensive it made gold look like loose change. If you were wearing that dye, you weren't just rich. You were ancient world-level Instagram famous. The Phoenicians were also the folks who thought, why not use the alphabet to keep track of all this trading? And so they did, creating a writing system that would influence alphabets all over the world. Talk about a side hustle that paid off. But their true legacy was their mastery of the sea, a skill that would be inherited by their greatest offspring, Carthage. Now, let's fast forward to 814 BCE. Enter Queen Dido, the legendary founder of Carthage. Her story is the stuff of epic poetry and historical skepticism. According to legend, Dido fled her homeland of Tyre with a treasure trove of gold and a small group of followers after her brother, Pygmalion, murdered her husband. You know, typical family drama. She landed on the shores of North Africa, where she was granted as much land as a bull's hide could cover. And here's the kicker. Dido, being the clever woman she was, cut the hide into thin strips and laid them out to encircle a sizable piece of land, enough to found a city. Genius or just a good tale, you decide. Carthage, which means new city in Phoenician, was more than just a city. It was a powerhouse waiting to happen. Located in present-day Tunisia, it was perfectly positioned to control trade routes across the Mediterranean. If the world was a game of Monopoly, Carthage had just landed on boardwalk. By the time Carthage hit its stride, it was a bustling hub of commerce, culture, and innovation, with harbors so advanced that even the Romans had to tip their helmets in admiration. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. Carthage didn't rise to power on good vibes alone. It was built on the back of a formidable navy, shrewd politics, and a knack for making money, sometimes at the expense of its neighbors. Sure, the story of its founding is wrapped in myth, but make no mistake, Carthage was a city that knew how to play the game. It was the Phoenicians' greatest legacy, a testament to their unparalleled maritime prowess and their ability to turn a few cedar trees into an empire that would challenge even the mighty Rome. So there you have it, the rise of Carthage, courtesy of the Phoenicians, and a queen who knew how to outsmart a bull's hide. Stick around, because the story is just getting started, and trust me, it only gets juicier from here. So, as Carthage settled into its role as the Mediterranean's new kid on the block, it didn't waste any time playing it safe. This was no small-town startup content with being just another dot on the map. No, Carthage was like that ambitious high schooler who graduates early and lands a spot at Harvard. Its eyes were set on the big leagues, and it knew exactly how to get there. Let's talk trade, because that was Carthage's bread and butter, or more accurately, its olive oil and wine. Situated smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean, Carthage had a geographical advantage that was basically a cheat code for commerce. It was like the crossroads of the ancient world, where east met west, and everyone had something to sell or buy. Carthaginian merchants were the masters of this bustling marketplace, and they knew how to turn a tidy profit. They exported everything from textiles to precious metals, and imported exotic goods like Iberian silver, Sicilian wheat, and of course, spices that made food taste like something more than just sustenance. But trade wasn't just about having a nice chat over a cup of wine. It was serious business. And for serious business, you needed ships, lots of them. The Carthaginians were the Elon Musks of ship design, constantly innovating and tweaking to stay ahead of the competition. Their secret weapon, the quinquereme, a warship that was the naval equivalent of a sports car. With 5 rows of oars and a sleek, fast design, it could outmaneuver and outrun most adversaries. This wasn't just a boat, it was a floating fortress. You could almost hear the envious whispers from rival ports. And let's not forget about the Carthaginian harbor, a marvel of ancient engineering. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill dock. It was a bustling hub of activity, designed with military precision. The military harbor, or Carthon, was circular and could accommodate more than 200 ships. These weren't just parked like cars in a mall lot. They were ready to set sail at a moment's notice. It's as if the Carthaginians said, "Hey, let's build a harbor that also doubles as a naval base." And then they went ahead and did it. With trade routes locked down and a navy to enforce them, Carthage's coffers swelled like a lottery winner's bank account. By the 6th century BCE, this city was rolling in wealth, and it wasn't shy about showing it. The rich lived in lavish homes, adorned with mosaics and frescoes that would make any art collector green with envy. The city itself was a testament to its prosperity, with temples and public buildings that proclaimed, "Carthage is here, and it's fabulous." But before you cue the applause, it's important to note that Carthage's rise to power wasn't all smooth sailing and golden sunsets. The city had its share of frenemies, and its expansion wasn't always met with warm welcomes and party favors. For instance, the Greeks weren't exactly thrilled about Carthage's growing influence. The two powers had a relationship that could best be described as it's complicated, with periodic skirmishes and territorial disputes that would make a soap opera look tame. Yet, Carthage had a knack for navigating these tricky waters. Its leaders were savvy diplomats, skilled in the art of negotiation as much as they were in the art of war. They knew when to wield the olive branch and when to brandish the sword. This delicate balancing act allowed Carthage to expand its influence across North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and beyond. The city also had a penchant for alliances, treating them like strategic investments. One such alliance was with the Etruscans, those enigmatic early Italians whose influence spread across the Italian peninsula like a fine layer of truffle oil. Together, they kept the Greeks in check and ensured their trade routes remained open and profitable. However, let's not romanticize it too much. While Carthage was a beacon of commerce and culture, its success was built on the backs of countless laborers and slaves. The city's wealth didn't just materialize out of thin air. It was extracted, often with brutal efficiency. These were the unsung heroes, or perhaps more accurately, the exploited workers, whose sweat fueled the Carthaginian machine. And speaking of machines, Carthage was a well-oiled one. Its government was a complex beast, a republic with elements of oligarchy that would make the most seasoned political scientist pause for breath. The city was ruled by a duo of Suffites, elected annually, who shared power with a council of elders known as the Senate. It's as if the Carthaginians thought, why not combine the best, and sometimes the worst, of both worlds? In the end, Carthage's early years were like a roller coaster ride, full of thrilling highs and gut-wrenching lows. It transformed from a scrappy colony into a formidable empire, driven by a relentless pursuit of wealth and power. Sure, the legends paint a picture of a city founded on clever trickery and mythical foresight, but the reality was far more complex and far more interesting. Carthage was a city of ambition, innovation, and sometimes ruthless pragmatism. And while the Greeks and later the Romans might have had a few things to say about that, one thing was clear. Carthage was here to stay, at least for now. So, whether you see Carthage as a beacon of civilization or a ruthless mercantile machine, there's no denying its impact. The city was a testament to what a few clever minds and a lot of hard work could achieve. And as we continue to explore the rise and eventual fall of this ancient powerhouse, remember that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about people, decisions, and the ripples they create. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over, and there's plenty more history to uncover. Now, let's dig into the political animal that was Carthage. While Dido's bullhide stunt was legendary, The city-state's true magic lay in its ability to keep a firm grip on power without coming apart at the seams. You see, Carthage wasn't your run-of-the-mill monarchy where one guy in a shiny hat called the shots. No, it was a republic with a twist, an oligarchy really, where power was as much about wealth as it was about wisdom, or at least the appearance of it. The Carthaginians were ruled by a pair of suffetes, a fancy title that translates to judges, though they were more like CEOs with a political spin. These top dogs were elected annually, a good way to keep them on their toes, or at least make them sweat for votes. And for those who think term limits are a modern invention, Carthage was way ahead of you. The suffetes didn't have the luxury of a lifelong gig. Each had to make their mark quickly before the next election cycle, a system that added a touch of urgency to their rule. But the real power brokers were the Council of 104, an elite club of rich and influential dudes who made the Senate look like a debating society. This council was the ultimate board of directors, and if you weren't in it, you were probably out of the loop. They were responsible for overseeing military matters, and let's be honest, ensuring their own interests were well protected. After all, what's the point of being in charge if you can't keep your pockets lined? And speaking of military matters, Carthage had a particular knack for outsourcing its battles. Forget drafting citizens to fight for some abstract notion of glory. Carthage knew that cold, hard cash spoke louder than patriotic fervor. They employed mercenaries, lots of them. From Iberian warriors to Numidian cavalry, Carthage didn't discriminate as long as the fighters were effective and the price was right. Why risk your own skin when you can pay someone else to do it for you? It was a strategy born out of pragmatism, and it allowed the Carthaginians to punch well above their weight. These hired guns were a mixed blessing. On one hand, they provided Carthage with a flexible and formidable fighting force, ready to jump into battle at a moment's notice. On the other hand, mercenaries were a bit like cats, loyal only as long as the food bowl was full. If payments were delayed, loyalty could waver faster than you could say mutiny. It was a risky balancing act, but when it worked, it was like a well-oiled machine, a lethal, well-oiled machine. Now, let's talk citizens. Keeping the folks at home content while you're off waging wars isn't a walk in the park. The Carthaginian government had to ensure that the economic benefits of their conquests trickled down, at least enough to keep the grumbling to a minimum. The city itself was a bustling hub of commerce, with opportunities for business and trade that made it a magnet for fortune seekers. And let's not forget the public projects. Carthage wasn't shy about flaunting its wealth through grandiose buildings and impressive public works. It's amazing what a few shiny new temples can do for civic pride. But here's the kicker. The Carthaginian political system wasn't a democracy in the way the Greeks like to wax poetic about theirs. The Athenians might have had their citizen assemblies and their love affair with the concept of direct democracy, but Carthage was all about efficiency and influence. The oligarchs ran the show, and while there was some degree of citizen participation, real power rested with those who could afford it. Money talked, and it often spoke in the language of power. Yet the Carthaginian system had its merits. It was stable, adaptable, and, dare I say, pragmatic. It allowed Carthage to expand its influence across the Mediterranean without letting internal strife tear it apart. While the Greek city-states were busy arguing over who had the best form of government, Carthage was quietly building an empire. Sure, it wasn't the stuff of Athenian dreams, but it worked. And in the cutthroat world of ancient geopolitics, results were all that mattered. In this political landscape, the line between myth and reality was as thin as a bull's hide. Carthage, with its oligarchs and mercenaries, was a testament to what could be achieved when ambition and strategy danced hand in hand. It was a city that knew how to keep its eyes on the prize, even if that meant playing a little dirty. As we unravel more of Carthage's story, remember that history isn't just a list of dates and battles. It's a tale of human nature, with all its quirks and contradictions. So buckle up, because the Carthaginian Empire's journey is far from over, and the best, or perhaps the worst, is yet to come. As Carthage continued its journey through history, it was inevitable that it would eventually butt heads with the rising power of Rome. The stage was set for a clash of titans, a Mediterranean showdown that would make any blockbuster battle scene look like a playground scuffle. Enter the Punic Wars, where elephants were as common as misunderstandings, and strategic blunders were par for the course. First, let's set the scene. By the time the First Punic War kicked off in 264 BCE, Carthage was sitting pretty as the dominant naval power, while Rome, that plucky upstart, was flexing its muscles on land. The two were like oil and water, destined to collide over who got to play king of the hill in the Mediterranean. The spark, a little island called Sicily, which was less about sunbathing and more about strategic control. Carthage had long held sway there, but Rome had its eye on the prize, and it wasn't about to back down. Now, let's talk economics, because wars aren't just about who has the biggest army. They're about who can afford to keep that army fed and armed. Carthage, with its vast trade networks and deep coffers, seemed well-positioned. But war is expensive, and Carthage soon found its purse strings tightening. The cost of mercenaries, those ever-fickle soldiers of fortune, was no small sum. And while Carthage had the advantage at sea, building and maintaining a fleet wasn't exactly a budget-friendly affair. Each quinquereme cost the equivalent of several tons of precious metal, and in a prolonged conflict, those expenses added up faster than you could say financial strain. Rome, on the other hand, was like a military startup with a growth strategy. Its legions were composed of citizen soldiers, fiercely loyal and ready to fight for the glory of the Republic. Plus, Rome had an ace up its toga, the corvus, a nifty boarding device that turned naval battles into land skirmishes. It was as if the Romans said, if we can't beat them at sea, we'll just bring the fight to our turf. And it worked. Carthage's naval supremacy was suddenly under siege, and Rome's resourcefulness began to tip the scales. Fast forward to the Second Punic War, starting in 218 BCE, where things really got spicy. Enter Hannibal Barca, Carthage's military prodigy, with a plan so audacious it still boggles the mind. His idea: march an army, complete with war elephants, over the Alps and into Italy. It was a logistical nightmare that should have ended in disaster, but somehow Hannibal pulled it off. Crossing the Alps with around 50,000 soldiers and 37 elephants, he defied the odds and the elements. Sure, he lost nearly half his army along the way, but the fact that he made it at all was like winning a rigged game of chance. Hannibal's campaign in Italy was the stuff of legend. He roamed the peninsula like a ghost, unsettling the Roman heartland and scoring victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and the infamous Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. At Cannae, Hannibal pulled a tactical masterpiece, encircling a larger Roman force and inflicting staggering losses. An estimated 50,000 Roman soldiers were left on the field. It was a blow that should have brought Rome to its knees, but here's where the Roman resolve kicked in. Rather than folding, they regrouped, re-strategized, and kept grinding. Despite Hannibal's early successes, Carthage struggled to capitalize on his victories. The Carthaginian Senate, perhaps overly cautious or just plain stingy, failed to send adequate reinforcements. Meanwhile, Rome played the long game, gradually wearing down Hannibal's forces through attrition and cutting off his supply lines. It was as if Carthage was sprinting while Rome settled in for a marathon. Economically, Carthage was feeling the pinch. Funding a prolonged war effort was draining the city's resources, and public morale was beginning to fray. The Carthaginian leadership was caught between supporting Hannibal's bold endeavors and managing their own domestic stability. It's a bit like trying to juggle flaming torches while balancing on a tightrope. Not impossible, but certainly not advisable. In the end, the Second Punic War became a battle of endurance. Hannibal's brilliance was undeniable, but Rome's dogged persistence and strategic adaptability ultimately prevailed. By 202 BCE, Carthage was on the defensive, and the decisive Battle of Zama sealed its fate. Under the leadership of Scipio Africanus, Rome delivered the knockout punch, and Carthage was forced to sue for peace. The terms were harsh: heavy reparations, the loss of overseas territories, and a significant reduction of Carthage's military capabilities. The war had cost Carthage not only its empire, but also its status as a major power. It was a sobering reminder that ambition, while admirable, can sometimes lead to overreach. Carthage had aimed for the stars, but landed back on the rocky shores of reality. So, was Carthage's ambition its downfall, or was Rome just better at playing the long game? Perhaps a bit of both. Carthage's daring strategies and naval prowess were impressive, but Rome's resilience and resourceful adaptability proved to be the deciding factors. In the end, History tends to favor those who can endure as much as those who can innovate. But don't cue the curtain just yet. Carthage's story isn't over. As they say, it's always darkest before the dawn, and this ancient city's final act is still to come. Stay tuned, because the tale of Carthage and its enduring legacy has a few more twists and turns before the final chapter is written. Carthage was down, but not quite out, like a boxer still staggering on his feet after a gut punch. The Battle of Zama in 202 BCE had left the city reeling, its dreams of Mediterranean domination scattered like broken pottery. But if you thought Carthage was just going to quietly fade into the annals of history, think again. This was a city with a stubborn streak and a talent for reinvention. Even after the Second Punic War, it managed to claw its way back to some semblance of prosperity, a bit like a washed-up celebrity making a surprise comeback on a reality show. By the time the dust settled, Carthage was a shadow of its former self, yet still a vital hub of commerce. It was like an aging rock star still packing arenas, even if the glory days were long gone. The city adapted, focusing on trade and agriculture to rebuild its economy. And it worked. Carthage's fields became the breadbasket of the Mediterranean once more, churning out grain, olives, and fruits like there was no tomorrow. The city's merchants, those wily navigators of the ancient world, found ways to keep the trade routes humming, even if they had to play second fiddle to Rome. But let's not sugarcoat it. Carthage's resurgence was under a very Roman thumb. The city had to play by new rules, its military ambitions heavily curtailed. It was like being under house arrest, but still allowed to throw lavish parties. The reparations demanded by Rome were steep, some 10,000 talents of silver over 50 years, a sum that could finance a mid-sized kingdom. Yet, Carthage managed to pay it off, proving that if nothing else, they were exceptionally good at making money. And then came 149 BCE, when Rome decided it had had enough of Carthage's resilience. The Romans were like that jealous neighbor who couldn't stand seeing your lawn looking greener. So they found a pretext, Carthage's defensive actions against the Numidians, Rome's allies, and declared war. This was the start of the Third Punic War, a conflict that was less about strategy and more about settling an old score. Rome wanted Carthage gone, pure and simple. The siege of Carthage, lasting from 149 to 146 BCE, was a brutal affair. Picture this. A city, once a beacon of maritime prowess, now a besieged fortress, its citizens fighting desperately against an implacable enemy. The Carthaginians, resourceful as ever, held out for 3 long years. But the odds were insurmountable. Rome had the numbers, the resources, and an unrelenting determination to see Carthage wiped off the map. It was as much a psychological battle as a physical one, and Rome was playing for keeps. When the Romans finally breached Carthage's defenses in 146 BCE, they unleashed a wave of destruction that was as thorough as it was ruthless. The city was razed, its walls torn down, its people either killed or sold into slavery. It was a scorched earth policy, literally. Legend has it that the Romans salted the fields to ensure nothing would grow there again, though historians today call that story a bit overcooked. It's a myth with a grain of truth. The Romans were intent on erasing Carthage from memory, but they probably had better things to do with their salt. With Carthage reduced to rubble, Rome emerged as the undisputed powerhouse of the Mediterranean. This victory wasn't just about military might. It was about persistence, politics, and perhaps a touch of serendipity. Rome had faced a formidable foe in Carthage, but it was relentless, adaptable, and knew how to play the long game. If Carthage was the sprinter, Rome was the marathon runner, pacing itself to outlast and outmaneuver its rival. Yet, the fall of Carthage left a legacy that rippled through history. Its story became a cautionary tale of hubris and imperial overreach, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall if they reach too far, too fast. Carthage's innovative maritime practices, from its ship designs to its harbors, left an indelible mark on naval warfare and trade. The city's economic strategies influenced generations of merchants, proving that commerce could be as powerful as conquest. And let's not forget the cultural legacy. Carthage had been a melting pot of Phoenician, African, and Mediterranean influences, a vibrant tapestry of languages, traditions, and ideas. Even in its destruction, it contributed to the cultural stew that was the Roman Empire, blending elements of its heritage into the Roman mosaic. Now, What if Carthage had emerged victorious instead? Imagine a world where Hannibal's Alpine adventure had led to a decisive Carthaginian victory. Perhaps Rome would have been the one to face the wrecking ball of history, its ambitions nipped in the bud. The Mediterranean might have become a Carthaginian lake, with North Africa, Spain, and Sicily under its sway. Rome, if it survived at all, might have been a client state or a regional power, its destiny profoundly altered. In such a world, Carthage might have continued its tradition of maritime dominance, shaping trade networks and cultural exchanges across continents. Its approach to governance, with a blend of oligarchic and republican elements, might have influenced political systems beyond its borders. The Carthaginian model of outsourcing military power could have become the norm, leading to a very different kind of imperial warfare. But history, as it stands, chose a different path. Rome's victory set the stage for an empire that would stretch from Britain to the Middle East, a civilization that would define the ancient world and leave a legacy lasting to this day. Carthage, in its defeat, served as a stepping stone for Rome's ascent, a stark reminder of the costs of ambition. So, as we wrap up this epic tale of Carthage's rise and fall, remember that history isn't just a series of events. It's a reflection of human nature, with all its brilliance and folly. Carthage was a city that dared to dream big, and though those dreams ended in ashes, they left a mark that endures. In the grand tapestry of history, Carthage's story is a thread of ambition, innovation, and the relentless march of time. And as we look back, we're reminded that every empire, no matter how mighty, is just one chapter in the never-ending saga of human endeavor. In the thick, verdant heart of what we now call Nigeria, the kingdom of Benin was getting its act together. No, not the modern-day country of Benin. Confusing, I know. This was a powerhouse of culture and commerce, rising in the rainforest with all the gusto of a rock band on its first world tour. The stage was set in the 11th century, give or take a few years, when a cluster of Edo-speaking people decided it was high time they organized themselves into something a bit more formal than a loose network of villages. Enter the Argizo dynasty, which loosely translates to Kings of the Sky. Talk about aiming high, right? Now, the early Obas of Benin weren't just sitting around in leopard skins, contemplating their regal navel. They were busy turning mud into money, literally. You see, Benin City, the buzzing capital, wasn't your average town. It was fortified by a series of walls, a construction project that would make any ancient engineer weep with envy. These weren't just any walls. They spanned over 16,000 kilometers, with some parts reaching up to 20 meters high. That's longer than the Great Wall of China, if you're keeping score. Built from a mix of earth and ingenuity, these fortifications were a testament to the kingdom's early knack for organization and defense. It was like Game of Thrones, but with less betrayal and more pragmatic city planning. But let's not get too distracted by the architectural marvels. There was plenty happening on the ground, economically speaking. The kingdom of Benin sat at a geographical sweet spot, nestled between the Niger River and the Atlantic Ocean. This strategic locale meant trade routes aplenty, with merchants bustling in and out like it was the ancient version of Wall Street. Ivory, pepper, and later on, the not-so-savory slave trade lined the kingdom's coffers. The Obas knew how to leverage their assets, transforming the kingdom into a bustling hub of commerce and culture. Speaking of culture, let's talk art. The kingdom of Benin was becoming famous for its bronze sculptures and plaques. These weren't just decorative pieces to hang in some dusty palace hallway. They were the Instagram of their day, a way to immortalize important events, celebrate victories, and, of course, remind everyone who was in charge. The artisans of Benin were like the Michelangelos of West Africa, churning out masterpieces that would later make European collectors drool. And they did it with a lost wax casting technique, a method as complex as it sounds, involving beeswax, clay, and a whole lot of talent. Now, here's where things get a bit tangled in myth and reality. The early stories of the Obas are steeped in legend, with tales of divine origins and supernatural prowess. But if we strip away the embellishments, what remains is a series of savvy leaders who knew their way around politics and trade. Take Oba Uedo, for example. He wasn't just a figurehead. He reigned in the power of the Uzama, a council of noblemen who thought they ran the show. by centralizing power. Uedo laid the groundwork for the kingdom's transformation from a loose conglomerate of villages into a centralized, powerful state. It was political chess, and Uedo was playing 3 moves ahead. As the kingdom flourished, its influence spread far and wide. The Benin bronzes, as we now call them, became hot commodities, circulating as far as Portugal by the late 15th century. This wasn't just art. It was a message broadcast loud and clear. Benin was a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, back in the kingdom, the economy thrived on both traditional craftsmanship and the burgeoning trade with Europeans. The Portuguese, in particular, couldn't get enough of Benin's wares, establishing trade relations that would shape the region's future for centuries. So, what's the takeaway here? The Kingdom of Benin wasn't just a footnote in the annals of history. It was a vibrant, dynamic society that managed to blend military might, economic savvy, and artistic brilliance into a single, formidable entity. The early obas of Benin were the original influencers, setting trends and making connections that would reverberate through history. And while the myths and legends add a certain flair to the story, the real magic lies in the kingdom's ability to adapt, innovate, and thrive in a world that was anything but predictable. The Kingdom of Benin was a well-oiled machine, but not just in the economic or cultural sense. Its military prowess was nothing short of legendary, a mix of strategic brilliance and sheer audacity that would make even the most seasoned tactician nod in admiration. Forget about swinging swords wildly in a heroic frenzy. The Benin warriors were more about cunning than brute force. Their approach to warfare was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and tactical innovation. Think of it as chess with real stakes, where losing a pawn could mean losing a village. At the heart of Benin's military strategy were its so-called war chiefs, the equivalent of a modern-day Pentagon, but with more feathers and fewer PowerPoint presentations. These chiefs were no mere foot soldiers. They were seasoned veterans, trained in the art of war from a young age. They understood the terrain like the back of their leopard skin cloaks, using the dense rainforest to their advantage. Ambushes and guerrilla tactics were their bread and palm oil, allowing them to outmaneuver larger, less nimble forces. It was all about knowing when to strike, and just as importantly, when to retreat. But the Kingdom of Benin wasn't just playing defense. It had an eye on expansion, and its military campaigns were as much about territory as they were about sending a message. The Obas, ever the savvy communicators, understood the power of image, and this is where their famed bronze art comes into play. These were not just pretty sculptures. They were the ancient version of a press release, crafted to intimidate and awe both friend and foe alike. The bronzes often depicted scenes of military triumph, with the Oba standing tall and victorious, his enemies vanquished at his feet. It was a visual narrative that spoke louder than words, and the subtext was clear. Mess with Benin, and you'll end up as a cautionary tale cast in bronze. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. There's a tendency to romanticize these artworks as purely aesthetic achievements, but that's only part of the story. Sure, they were masterpieces of craftsmanship, but they were also tools of propaganda. These were not just decorations, they were strategic assets. The Benin bronzes were displayed prominently in the royal palace, where visiting dignitaries could marvel at them, fully aware of the implied threat. It was like hanging a giant beware of dog sign, only the dog was a well-trained army, and the sign was a piece of art worth its weight in gold, or in this case, bronze. The artisans of Benin were not just creating art, they were documenting history, commemorating victories, and crafting a narrative that underscored the kingdom's might. The lost wax casting technique they used was a marvel in itself, a meticulous process that involved creating a detailed wax model, encasing it in clay, and then pouring molten metal into the mold. It was labor-intensive and required a high degree of skill, but the results were nothing short of spectacular. These bronzes were not just objects, they were statements. And let's not forget the economic angle. The production of these bronzes was not a cheap endeavor. The materials had to be sourced, the artisans paid, and the finished products maintained. But the Obas understood that the investment was worth it. The bronzes were a form of soft power, a way to project strength and stability. They were also a valuable commodity, traded with Europeans who couldn't get enough of these exotic treasures. This trade brought wealth into the kingdom, further solidifying its position as a regional powerhouse. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was a world where might often made right, and the Kingdom of Benin was no exception. Its military campaigns, while strategically brilliant, were also brutal. Villages were razed, captives taken, and enemies subdued. It was a harsh reality, a reminder that beneath the romantic veneer of bronze and artistry lay a world of conflict and conquest. The Obers were not just patrons of the arts. They were leaders who understood the brutal calculus of power. They wielded their military might with precision, balancing diplomacy with force in a delicate dance of survival and supremacy. So, what does all this tell us about the Kingdom of Benin? It was a society that understood the power of image and the importance of narrative. It was a kingdom that used its military might to secure its borders and expand its influence. And it was a culture that blended art and warfare in a way that was both innovative and ruthless. The bronzes that survive today are more than just artifacts. They are a testament to a sophisticated society that knew how to wield power in all its forms. And while the myths and legends add a certain allure, the real story is one of strategy, skill, and the relentless pursuit of dominance in a world that was anything but simple. As we peel back the layers of history, we see a kingdom that was as complex as it was compelling, a place where art and warfare were two sides of the same gleaming bronze coin. And speaking of complexity, let's swivel our historical spotlight to Oba Uyue, a chap who didn't just rule the Kingdom of Benin, he reinvented it. Think of him as the Steve Jobs of his era, but instead of iPhones, he was rolling out governance innovations that would put even the most seasoned bureaucrat to shame. Uyue was not about to rest on the laurels of his predecessors. Nope, he was all about taking things to the next level, turning Benin into a well-oiled machine of urban planning and public administration. So, what did Uyue actually do? For starters, he streamlined the government, cutting through the political red tape like a hot knife through palm oil. His reign, which kicked off around 1440, was marked by a series of reforms that centralized power and established a hierarchy that made sense. He introduced a cabinet of sorts. Think of it as the original board of directors, comprising chiefs who were given specific portfolios. These weren't just ceremonial titles. They were roles with real responsibilities. Uyue was the maestro, conducting a symphony of governance where each note had its place. But Uyue wasn't just about bureaucratic brilliance. He had a flair for urban planning that would have made even the most seasoned city planner green with envy. Under his watch, Benin City transformed from a fortified village into a bustling metropolis. He laid out streets in a grid pattern that would make any modern urban designer nod in approval. And those walls we mentioned earlier, Uyue expanded them, solidifying the city's reputation as an impregnable fortress. It was like he took one look at the city and said, "We can do better," and then went ahead and did just that. Now, let's talk earthworks. These weren't your run-of-the-mill trenches. They were a feat of engineering that made other kingdoms look like they were playing with building blocks. The walls of Benin, stretching for thousands of kilometers, were more than just a military defense. They were a statement, a testament to the kingdom's organization and labor force. And here's where we bust a myth or two. The narrative of an invincible city is alluring, sure, but the reality was a bit different. While the walls were impressive, they weren't impenetrable. They were a deterrent, a signal to potential invaders that conquering Benin wouldn't be a cakewalk. Economically, Uyue understood that a thriving city needed more than just walls and administrative reforms. He turned Benin into a commercial hub, a place where trade routes converged and merchants flourished. The kingdom's economy was a well-balanced diet of agriculture, craftsmanship, and trade. Uyue introduced a standardized system of weights and measures, making trade more efficient and reducing the chances of getting shortchanged by a crafty merchant. He was setting up Benin for long-term prosperity, ensuring that its coffers were as fortified as its city walls. And then there's the cultural renaissance that Uyue spearheaded. Under his rule, the Kingdom of Benin became an epicenter of art and culture, a place where creativity was not just encouraged but celebrated. The bronzes of Benin, those exquisite pieces of art we've raved about, continue to flourish under Uyue's patronage. But he didn't stop there. He encouraged the development of other art forms, too. Wood carving, ivory work, and textiles all thrived during his reign. Uyue's court was a melting pot of artistic talent, a place where artisans could hone their craft and push the boundaries of creativity. Of course, no ruler's reign is all sunshine and rainbows, and Uyuez was no exception. His consolidation of power meant that those who opposed him were swiftly dealt with. His reforms, while brilliant, weren't exactly democratic. But here's the thing. In a world where might often made right, Uyuez's brand of autocracy was effective. He understood that to make an omelette, you had to break a few eggs, or in his case, crack a few skulls. As for his successors, they inherited a kingdom that was both a military powerhouse and a cultural beacon. Uyuez's blueprint for governance and urban planning laid the groundwork for the future Obas, who continued to expand and refine his vision. The city of Benin stood as a testament to their ambition, a sprawling metropolis that was the envy of West Africa. And while the myths of an invincible city lingered, the reality was a kingdom that was fiercely resilient, a place where art and governance walked hand in hand. In the grand tapestry of history, the kingdom of Benin during Uyuez's reign was a masterpiece of innovation and strategy. It was a place where the past met the future, where tradition blended seamlessly with progress. And as we delve deeper into this fascinating story, we see a kingdom that was as much about its people as it was about its walls, a society where the spirit of innovation thrived in the heart of the rainforest. So, as we leave Uyuez's era behind and look to the future, one thing's for sure. The story of Benin is far from over, and the best is yet to come. As the curtain fell on Uyuez's transformative reign, the kingdom of Benin was gearing up for an Angkor performance that no one saw coming. Enter the Portuguese, stage left, with their ships, spices, and insatiable appetite for new trade routes. Now, if you think the Portuguese were just showing up with a travel brochure and a friendly wave, think again. These were the navigators of global capitalism, the original globetrotters who saw opportunity in every port and profit in every transaction. The kingdom of Benin, with its strategic locale and abundant resources, was a prime target for these intrepid traders. What started as an innocent exchange of goods soon morphed into a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and power plays. And yes, there were shiny beads involved, but the stakes were far higher than a simple barter for baubles. We're talking about a high-stakes game of Monopoly, only with real territories and lives on the line. Let's talk trade dynamics. In the late 15th century, when the Portuguese first docked on the shores of the Benin River, they weren't just offloading trinkets. They brought textiles, copper, and the all-important firearms, which were a game-changer in regional power dynamics. In return, the Kingdom of Benin offered ivory, pepper, and most lucratively, slaves. It was a deal with the devil, a double-edged sword that promised prosperity but came with a hefty price tag. At first glance, it might seem like both parties were getting a fair shake. After all, Benin's coffers were filling up faster than a pirate's treasure chest, and the Portuguese were getting their exotic goods. But beneath the glossy surface, there was a darker reality. The introduction of firearms shifted the balance of power, making conflicts more deadly and altering the region's political landscape. It was like handing a match to a pyromaniac and expecting things not to catch fire. Cultural exchanges were also on the menu, not always as harmonious as a Sunday potluck. The Portuguese, with their distinct European sensibilities, were both fascinated and bewildered by Benin's rich tapestry of customs and traditions. They documented their observations, painting a picture of a kingdom that was as enigmatic as it was impressive. Meanwhile, the Obas of Benin were no strangers to cultural appropriation. They picked and chose elements of European technology and aesthetics that suited their needs, all while maintaining their cultural identity. It was a cultural exchange program with a side of skepticism, each side eyeing the other with a blend of curiosity and caution. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't the Portuguese simply try to conquer this formidable kingdom? Well, for one, the Kingdom of Benin wasn't exactly low-hanging fruit. Its military strength, fortified city, and savvy leadership made it a tough nut to crack. Plus, the Portuguese had learned a thing or two from their experiences in other parts of Africa. Sometimes, diplomacy and trade were far more lucrative than warfare. So instead of rolling in with cannons blazing, they opted for a more subtle approach, weaving themselves into the kingdom's economic fabric like a well-tailored suit. But this wasn't just a feel-good story of mutual benefit. The political chess game that unfolded was as intricate as it was ruthless. The Obers, ever the shrewd negotiators, played their cards close to the chest, leveraging Portuguese alliances to strengthen their hand against regional rivals. It was a delicate dance, one that required the perfect balance between cooperation and control. And it wasn't long before other European powers started sniffing around, eager to get their piece of the pie. The Dutch, the English, they all wanted a seat at the table, turning the waters off Benin into a geopolitical buffet where everyone was jockeying for position. In the midst of all this, the Kingdom of Benin continued to thrive, its art and culture flourishing like never before. The famed Benin bronzes, now infused with new influences, became even more sought after by European collectors. But beneath the artistic renaissance lay the harsh reality of the slave trade, a shadow that loomed large over the kingdom's prosperity. Trade brought wealth, yes, but it also brought suffering, tearing apart communities and fueling cycles of violence that would have lasting repercussions. So, what's the takeaway from this chapter in the Kingdom of Benin's history? It's a story of ambition and adaptation, where the allure of wealth and power danced hand in hand with the specter of exploitation. The kingdom's interactions with European traders were a testament to its ability to navigate the treacherous waters of global trade, but they also served as a reminder of the costs that came with such entanglements. As the kingdom's fortunes rose, so too did the challenges it faced, both from within and without. And as we look to the future, the stage is set for even more dramatic twists and turns. The Kingdom of Benin, with its rich history and complex legacy, continues to captivate and confound, offering lessons in resilience, ingenuity, and the timeless dance of power and politics. So, stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue and adventure on the horizon. And just like that, the curtain rises on the final act of our historical saga, the decline of the Kingdom of Benin. As with any gripping story, real life doesn't always offer a fairy tale ending. Picture this: the late 19th century, a time when the British Empire was busy painting the map red, as though trying to outdo a kid with a new box of crayons. The Kingdom of Benin, despite its rich legacy, was about to find itself in the crosshairs of imperial ambition. By the late 1800, Benin was caught in a perfect storm of internal strife and external pressures. The internal tension was like a simmering pot, threatening to boil over. The Ober's once firm grip on power was slipping, with factionalism and intrigue making the royal court seem less like an orderly council and more like a soap opera. Internal divisions weakened the kingdom at a time when it needed unity the most. Meanwhile, the British, with their eye on the oil-rich palm nuts and strategic locations, were coming in hot and heavy, fueled by a heady mix of greed and the moralistic swagger of the era. You know, civilizing missions and all that jazz. Enter the British punitive expedition of 1897, a euphemistic name if ever there was one. The term punitive is doing some heavy lifting here, implying a sense of justice being served. In reality, it was more of a well-orchestrated land grab disguised as retribution. The British had been itching for an excuse to flex their imperial muscles, and a minor diplomatic incident gave them just the pretext they needed. Here's the tea. A British delegation, led by Acting Consul General James Phillips, marched toward Benin City, allegedly to negotiate trade relations. Unbeknownst to them, they picked the absolute worst time, during the sacred Eid festival, when outsiders were not welcome. The ensuing skirmish resulted in the death of Phillips and his party, which the British used as a casus belli. Spoiler alert, the response was not a sternly worded letter. In February 1897, a British force of 200 men, armed to the teeth with Maxim guns and other modern weaponry, descended on Benin City. It was less a battle and more an overwhelming show of force. The kingdom's defenses, impressive in their heyday, crumpled under the technological might of the British. The sacking of Benin was brutal. The city was looted, the royal palace was torched, and thousands of priceless artifacts were carted off to decorate British drawing rooms. The British claimed they were bringing civilization, but it sure looked a lot like pillaging. It was a textbook example of how propaganda can become reality, as the narrative of a barbaric kingdom justified the very barbarism of the expedition itself. And so, the Kingdom of Benin fell, not with a bang, but with the whimper of a civilization dismantled piece by piece. But here's the kicker. The very bronzes that were plundered and shipped off to Europe became the kingdom's unexpected ambassadors. These artifacts, with their intricate detail and historical depth, confounded European audiences who'd been spoon-fed tales of Africa as a cultural void. Suddenly, the narrative had to change. The bronzes challenged stereotypes, offering undeniable proof of Benin's sophisticated artistry and rich cultural heritage. Today, those Benin bronzes remain scattered across the globe, residing in museums far from home. Calls for their repatriation have grown louder, echoing a broader movement to reassess the legacies of colonialism. They serve as a poignant reminder of the complex intertwining of art, culture, and power. Despite the kingdom's fall, its artistic legacy endures, a testament to a society that was anything but primitive. The bronzes are silent witnesses to a story of resilience, innovation, and the relentless human spirit. The kingdom of Benin may have declined, but its legacy reverberates through time. It's a legacy that challenges us to rethink narratives, to see beyond the simplistic tales of conquerors and conquered. The story of Benin is a stark reminder of the impermanence of power and the enduring nature of culture. In the end, the kingdom's true lasting legacy is not in its walls or its wars, but in its art, a timeless dialogue between past and present, a conversation that continues to inspire and provoke. As we close the book on the Kingdom of Benin, let's take a moment to appreciate the lessons it offers, the importance of adaptability, the power of narrative, and the enduring strength of cultural identity. It's a story that reminds us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a complex tapestry of human experience. And as we look to the future, the echoes of Benin's past continue to resonate, inviting us to learn, to reflect, and ultimately to remember.